go. John's here. Great.
Oh, you very much have your own voice for it. Getting traction.
One more and then we can start.
It's an unusual setup.
Doing a little interview.
Next time we
Yes,
come
I
to
really
Scotland,
Right,
we'll have some things to make sure
don't exactly know how it's we do a couple of items first. And then you can tell me.
one of the disability guys we just
We're the only ones here. There's no official.
what the sound was as well. Leave some with you for accessibility.
Yeah, I just thought it was.
The English and Māori. Can, cinema. Yes, we have a few of the English and Māori ones for people.
Because I saw Alf going. I agree.
Can I take these? Fantastic. I'm sure you've got some.
We're here.
Howdy, Sayers. How you going?
It's helpful.
Not at all.
That one?
Kia ora hui hui mai tātou, ina mana, ina rio, ina hau e whā, nau mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Kathy Casey. It's my great delight to chair the committee, and I'm looking forward so much to our session today. Welcome to our panel members, our local board members, members of the public, members of the media, and of course the committee, the Community Development and Safety Committee. And I'll start by asking the members of that committee to introduce themselves. And John, you're it.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. John Watson, I represent the Albany ward.
Good everyone, I'm Richard Hills from the North Shore ward.
Taloha ni e Fiso Collins Manuko.
Tēnā koutou, talofa, Josephine Bartley, Maunga Kiki, Tamaki.
Kia ora, Greg Sayers representing the Rodney ward.
Kia ora tātou, ko Tony Kake toku ingoa. I'm a member of the Independent Māori Statutory Board.
Thanks, Tony. And we have a number of staff present officiating today at the committee. We'll start with you, Ian.
Ian Maxwell, the Director of Community Services here at Auckland Council.
Kia ora koutou, Deborah James, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Council. Kia ora koutou, Ramadi Slattery, Head of Strategic Portfolio Office.
And the boss, Sonia.
Kia ora, dobar den. Sonia Tobolska, I'm the Governance Advisor for this committee.
That's a nice segue into our housekeeping from Sonia.
So when you came in through the stairs or the lifts, the toilets are just at the exit. In case of emergency, just please use the stairs in any fire evacuation as well. People who cannot access the stairs, can you just please wait at the stairwell and somebody will help you with it.
Thank you, Sonia. Now, you can take pictures. Please do. And Helen Clark will be available for pictures at the end of her presentation as well. So, let's get started. Why are we doing this? I presume everybody in this room knows about Suffrage 125. It's 125 years since women... Oh, I thought that was a fire.
That's terrible.
It's 125 years since women got the vote in New Zealand, and there have been celebrations up and down in the country. In fact, tonight, Helen Clark and Councillor Penny Hulse will be at the Auckland Museum to open a new exhibition called Are We There Yet? As you'll find out today, no, we're not there yet. But that exhibition opens on Friday, and I really urge you all to go up and see it. Free entry, of course, if you're from Auckland. So a sad reflection, though. The Me Too movement opened up or put under the spotlight sexual harassment in this last year. And when you get home tonight and look at the news, you'll find that the Russell McVeigh report came out this morning at 10 o'clock. This isn't good, and as you'll hear in our report at the end of this meeting today, New Zealand has one of the worst rates of partner violence in the world. And that's nothing to be proud of. So part of what we're here to do today is address that issue. So today's all about CEDAW. You'll hear that word come up again and again, and it's really important that you understand what it stands for. It's a convention for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And next week, many of our presenters today will be in Geneva to present to the UN how New Zealand is going. And again, you'll find out that we're not actually doing so well. So I'll leave it to the speakers to announce that. The speakers will be answering questions that have already been submitted by our demographic advisory panels and our women's groups. So thank you for taking that on board. Jackie and Helen have already read the questions and will be addressing them during their presentations. But there will also be time for questions from the committee of our two main speakers, Jackie and Helen. So I'm looking forward to that. So if you find that Jackie doesn't address something you have a burning desire to ask, you may well ask it. So, who are our eminent women today? And I'm so pleased to see you all here, I can't tell you. We'll start with Jackie Blue, who really needs no introduction. She's the Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner. And tomorrow, on a plane, she's off to Geneva tomorrow night. So this is her last gig before she goes. So she's all fired up, because the next person she's going to be addressing is the United Nations. So thank you very much for being here, Jackie. Our panel, Christine King, well known to all of us, has been before this committee many times, from Pacific Women's Watch. Whitney Adam, if you just raise your hand when you're here, Women in Urbanism. Cinnamon Whitlock from the Maori Women's Welfare League. And Tangaloa Tele, Professor Peggy Fairburn Dunlop from Pacifica. Last but not least, our own Helen Clark, who will be arriving during the break to start at, Sonia's not here, 2:40? 3:20? Helen Clark. So we'll have a wee break before that. So the way it's going to run today is we'll have Jackie speaking, then we'll have the panel, then we'll have a wee break, and then we'll have Helen Clark. So I'd like everybody back in their seats in time for Helen when she does come in. So we've got the meeting to order, so I will open the meeting by asking for apologies. Sonia.
We have apologies from Councillors Wayne Walker, IMSB member Dennis Kirkwood for absence, and Councillor Daniel Newman, Councillor John Walker for absence on council business, and another apology from Councillor Filipaina that have just come in.
He's coming.
Not really sure.
Not sure. Okay. Will somebody move? Efeso, seconded by Josephine. Alfie has just arrived. Welcome. We were just talking about you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. There are no. Are there any declarations of interest from committee members?
I haven't received any.
None received. There are none. Confirmation of minutes. Would somebody who was at the last meeting like to move that?
Yes.
Thank you, Tony. Seconded by Efeso. All those in favour? Against? Carried. We have no petitions. We have no public input. We have no local board input. We have no extraordinary items. We have no notices of motion unless someone's going to surprise me in the next 2 minutes. No. So it's right on to our first agenda item. Just let me get organised. Thank you very much. Jackie, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the platform as our Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner. I know that ending violence against women is a passion of yours. I know we're going to be hearing about that today, and it's just my great delight to invite you to take the platform.
Kia ora koutou, can you hear me all right, or do I need to move this a bit closer to me?
Yep.
Okay. It's a wonderful, it's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. I will be focusing particularly on what the Human Rights Commission will be submitting to the CEDAW committee next week.
We'll do it here.
Okay, cool. Next one. I'm sure many of you do know what CEDAW is, but I will go over it for those who perhaps may not know what it is. It is a convention, it's a United Nations Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And New Zealand ratified the CEDAW Convention in 1985 and is obliged to report to the United Nations CEDAW Committee to report on the status of women's rights in New Zealand. It was last reviewed in 2012 and it will be reviewed next week. So it's been about 6 years since it was last reviewed. And of course, the CEDAW committee, in their preparation for reviewing the government, which will be next Thursday in Geneva, they take on board submissions from NGOs, and there's been a lot of high quality submissions from the NGOs in New Zealand. Many NGOs are travelling to Geneva. They'll have an opportunity to talk to the CEDAW committee. So basically we get there sometime over the weekend, and we get busy over that Monday and Tuesday lobbying and advocating for the things that we think are really important the CEDAW committee should acknowledge and take on board, and then question and grill the government on the Thursday. It's the first time I'm going, so it's a new process for me, but I understand it's a very exciting one, and I'm looking forward to it. Next one, please. Yeah. So the questions, I mean, as part of the talk today, I've been asked to address a number of questions which are listed up there. They're really, and I will include those as part of my presentation. They're asking me what I think are the main areas of discrimination that women face in New Zealand, what my views are on temporary special measures in view of the inequalities, particularly with Pacifica and Māori and other women's groups. What changes in leadership culture are needed to get wider representation of diversity in leadership, including rainbow and transgender communities, and disability and accessibility. And also there's a question about the Treasury having recently reported on gender auditing, and what are my views on this, and how might take it into account to look at the intersectional challenges such as some women, such as disabled women and trans women, might face. So I'll incorporate those into my address this afternoon, apologies. Next one, thank you. So just thinking about, there's the list of issues we are talking to the CEDAW committee about, but for the purposes of today, how I would rate the most serious areas of discrimination, I would absolutely put gender-based violence up there, no question about it. It's huge, it's massive, and it's definitely linked to gender equality and the lack of it. Upwards of 500,000 family violence victims in New Zealand at any one stage. We know that 20% of women only report to the police, and it could even be as low as 13%. So that, extrapolate out, that's 500,000 victims somewhere in New Zealand who are experiencing family violence. And I'll put a plug in for Jan Logie's bill. We know that 40% of those victims could be in paid employment, so Jan's bill is about asking that businesses allow 10 extra days leave above and beyond the normal entitlements, so that they can attend family violence related appointments, and they can get support and make forward progress in leaving a violent relationship. The employment also is, I will talk to those separately, but clearly there's still many inequalities in employment, and employment potentially, particularly for women who are in a violent relationship, they need to stay in employment as it gives them the independence that they need. That's the other thing that Jan's bill will do, will ensure that those women, instead of resigning because they're disrupting the workplace and arriving late, or not at all, can stay in paid employment, which is really important. But I'll give you some stats a bit later on. Otherwise, the ones that are women in leadership, health and data collection, well, I'll talk also about women in leadership, but health, data collection and exploitation and trafficking, I won't talk to, there won't be time to, but I can maybe address some questions. And there's a question on gender budgeting, which I'll talk to. Let's have the next one, please. So gender-based violence, well, the main sort of request that we're going to give to the CEDAW committee is that they take on our recommendation that there should be cross-party accord on any family violence strategies going forward. We've had governments come and governments go, and everyone does all governments do their very best to do what they think is right, and they often get started, and then the government might change and it all starts again. So we think we're very serious about this. We think there should be a cross-party alliance accord on family violence strategies, so that these strategies can hopefully endure past the political cycle, which has not necessarily been the case. And everyone has good intentions, but we need to not start from scratch every time there's a new government. So that's the most urgent one that we see. Otherwise, it's making sure that it's long-term planning. We have timelines. We have guide. We have timelines that need to be adhered to, greater transparency, consultation with every affected group. And that's Māori and Pacific women, it's disabled, it's LGBTI, and ethnic minority groups. Ensure that there's consultation and that policy development is is developed with those groups. The domestic violence legislation, there's been a special push by the disability community that in any legislation that domestic violence occurring between a person and a non-family caregiver or paid support worker should be covered, and that certainly was very prominent in submissions to the Family and Whānau Violence Bill. That's still not sure where that's at. It is coming back to Parliament. It's been in select committee, so I'm hoping that will be something that's been amended and that is being taken on board. But certainly we want a mechanism where any domestic violence strategy or policy, there's always a 12-month progress where the people can, I just need some water, I'm getting very thirsty, where people can report back on progress, so there's absolute transparency. Next one, please. There were two other recommendations which, after reading the NGO submissions, that I'm going to be supporting when I go to Geneva. Now, one is by Backbone, which is a group of women and family violence victims and survivors who are very concerned about the family court reforms under the last government and legal aid changes as well. And they were very, very passionate and very clear and I took on board their submission. It was also included in other submissions as well. But the background to that is that the new government has said they're going to the new government has said that they're going to have an inquiry into the family court reforms of 2014. But the NGO group are very concerned that it just doesn't start there. It goes beyond 2014 and goes further than 2014. They initially wanted a royal commission into the family court. The government said no to that. So their second choice, and one that I will be supporting, is an invitation to the Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women to come to New Zealand and as an independent expert review the family court and legal aid changes which have happened where women are not getting the access to justice and the legal representation that has happened over those changes since 2010. I certainly support that. The other thing I was quite horrified to read, excuse me, glass water, is that the Family Violence Clearinghouse, which is an amazing resource that's housed in the population of School of Development at Auckland University, and there's 2 or 3 people, and they do amazing work collecting all the data regarding family violence. And I heard that they have not had a funding increase for 9 years, and B, that in their last contract, the requirement to do data summaries was no longer there. So consequently, they won't be producing any more data summaries. Now, this group does high quality work, it's credible, does a national collection of data, and we rely on it hugely, as do other sort of NGOs out there. So I was quite astonished that we're not going to get these amazing data summaries that we're so used to getting. So though I probably won't be making a specific recommendation around the Family Violence Clearinghouse, I will be making a high-level one that NGOs working in the sector need to be resourced such that they can carry out their very necessary work. I'll follow up that with the appropriate people in government to make sure that their budgets can be looked at regarding the Family Violence Clearinghouse. Next one, please. I think employment and pay is critical. It's a critical issue in New Zealand, particularly for women, and we do a interactive web tool called Tracking Equality at Work, and we've just updated it for the 2017 data, and it's live on our website, and that's the link up there. It's a really good, useful tool. It looks at pay and employment and discrimination and leadership, and with pay and employment, you can absolutely filter it by age, ethnicity, and gender. So you can also get trends over time since 2011, since we've been monitoring this. So it's a really powerful tool, and you can actually see where the trends are and where the concerns are. Haven't got time to give you a whole presentation on the website, but just to give you some stats, as far as unemployment goes, 1 in 20, and this is all approximate because it makes it much easier than quoting percentages at you. 1 in 20 New Zealanders are unemployed, but for young Māori women it's 1 in 4, and for young Pacific women it's 1 in 5. For NEET rates, that's the not in education, employment or training, and that really represents people who are youth who are really disengaged in the whole labour market. They've fallen through the cracks basically. And there's two groups, there's 15 to 19 NEETs, as we call them for short, and there's 20 to 24 NEETs. The 15 to 19-year-olds, they've got lowish NEET rates, or under 12%. Now that's not brilliant, but it's lowish, it's about 12%. 1 in 10, say, 1 in 11 are NEET in that 15 to 19 age group. Most, in other words, are studying or at school or they're learning, which is good to see, and that's what it's all about. You come to the 20 to 24-year age group, and I'm afraid it's not so great. For an example, a European woman, that age group, 20 to 24, 1 in 10 is NEET. So very few are NEET, only 1 in 10. But for Māori and Pacific women, it's 1 in 3. And those rates have been deteriorating since 2015. So that's very bad, very, very bad. Such a waste of human potential. Okay, and also I would add there that young Pacific men also have a high NEET rate, but because I'm focusing on CEDAW and women, I probably won't talk to the committee about that, but that is Pacific men also are marginalised very much so because of their high NEET rates. The gender pay gap, which we often get a lot of information and profile on in the labour market, across the labour market, is 9.4%, and that's reducing, but nonetheless it's going to take another 40 years if we just keep up the rate we're going to get to a gender pay gap of 0. But if you compare a European man with a Māori woman and a Pacific woman, if you compare those, the ethnic pay gap between the least marginalised, which is the European man, the gender pay gap or the ethnic pay gap for a Māori woman is 25%. And for a Pacifica woman, it's 27%. So big differences there when you're looking at the general pay gap. The minimum wage, 2017, it's astonishing that in 2017 the majority of minimum wage earners over 25 are women, and they almost make up 68% of that group. The minimum wage is generally thought of as a youth starting rate, and really by the time you're over 25 you shouldn't be on the minimum wage. But in actual fact, upwards of 67.4% of earners over the age 25 are women, and that really makes that point that women tend to dominate those low sector jobs in the caring sector, which we have, and the caring sector improvements with the big 55,000 women who got the big pay increases from July last year will show up in the next lot of labour market statistics. But as of 2017, June last year, before they got the increase, it's upwards of 67% of women over the age of 25. Now, disabled workers, we are really frustrated at getting data for disabled workers. Generally speaking, we wait for each census before they can do a really in-depth disability survey of people who have identified as disabled in the census. That's stopped. It's only going to happen every 10 years now, and we won't be getting the next in-depth survey till 2023. In the meantime, they have got some other surveys that NZ Stats are doing, and they are including disability questions. Like, for instance, the Household Labour Force survey in June last year, they did ask these disability questions, and we got some pretty bad stats out of that, but unfortunately they don't disaggregate some data down to male and female, so they're not resourced to do that. So we are getting some data. We know that NEETs, they're not in employment and educational training for disabled people under 25, so it's 15 to 24-year-olds, is 42%. That's shocking. It's absolutely shocking, 42%, but we don't get a breakdown male versus female. But I can assure you from the last disability survey following the census 2013, it's grim stuff. A disabled man do badly, but disabled women do much, much worse. So, you know, when you can see when you put a couple of groups together that are marginalised, you get a very grim outlook for them. Next one, please. So we're making some employment recommendations to the CEDAW committee, and the first one, which is about incorporating the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. Of course, that's going to happen at some stage this year with the new equal pay legislation that's been drafted. And we're obviously looking forward to that. It's going to make a big difference. It's going to be geared for, obviously, particularly women who dominate low-paid sectors. We had a really exciting announcement the other day from the State Services Minister as well as the Minister for Women. Because the PSA union had taken the State Service Commission to court, threatening to court, they got a working group together to look at gender pay principles across the public service. And these principles, when you read them, are amazing. I'm so impressed with them. And I absolutely think they need to be enshrined in our employment law, because that, although it's going to help reduce the gender pay gap in the public service, which the Minister for Women has come out saying we need to get it down to 0 by 2021, this gender pay gap, gender pay principles will be a game changer and be like a blueprint for all those public service departments to actually follow. So you should look at those, and you should actually look at adopting those. I think they, because in the public service you don't necessarily have women dominating particular sectors, but that doesn't mean they're not marginalised, suffer unconscious bias, and their careers hit a roadblock. So those gender pay principles are pretty astonishing, well thought out. It was a collaboration between the unions and the State Services Commission, and I'm really impressed. So I'd love to see those enshrined in legislation as guiding principles. We'd like to see state sector organisations, and to begin with the state-owned enterprises and the mixed ownership models, to start publishing their gender pay gaps, their ethnic pay gaps, and other EO metrics. And we've chosen the state sector organisations, or the SOEs, and the mixed ownership model ones, which are like the Meridian, the big energy companies that became part public, part government owned, because they really are, the way they function really like private businesses. They're very outward facing. They have to compete with the private sector, and quite frankly, of all the companies and the entities in the state sector, they are the ones that should start acting and behaving like a private organisation. And because mainly the leadership's coming from the public sector, there's no question about that, and we really want these companies to step up and lead the way for the private sector to follow. We would like to see legislation such that companies over 100 employees are also required to report annually their gender pay gaps and bonus gaps and other metrics. That's what's happening in Australia and has been happening since 2012, and very successfully. The sky hasn't fallen in, and progress has been made. So we'd like to follow suit. In the UK, it's for companies over 250 employees. I'd like to see paid parental leave for men in their own right. At the moment, we're up to 22 weeks paid parental leave, going up to 26 weeks in the next couple of years. But men can take unpaid. They are eligible for up to 2 weeks unpaid parental leave, and certainly the prime parent can actually share their leave with the other partner, but you can't have two people home at the same time being paid. You can't have two primary caregivers. So that situation doesn't arise. And I think we need to follow the Nordic countries in this, where men, you have a use it or lose it, where they are given paid parental leave, and anywhere up to several weeks, up to 6 months. And it really normalises gender equality. When children growing up see both their mum and their dad looking after them, that they can see that both models are equally valued, and they start seeing gender equality living and not just a theory. So once we get to 26 weeks paid parental leave, I'd like to see start paid parental leave for men coming in. Some of the private sector companies are actually doing this, and they're good on them. Sexual harassment in the workplace, well, it's a big one, and it's something which my organisation has had to deal with, and now Russell McVeigh. But I can assure you, they aren't the only workplaces in New Zealand that have this problem. It is, the Me Too campaign has been phenomenal, and it has also been in New Zealand. It's swept New Zealand, and it's not going to go away this time. Over the last 10 years, we've had surveys from the PSA showing we've got a problem. We've had the Roger Sutton issue, where we had a high-profile case, a lot of flurry of activity, then it seems to die away. Quite frankly, this is definitely not going away, not with the high-profile cases to date. And my word of warning, and this is to the council as well, is God's sake, don't wait for a crisis. Make sure you've got a policy that's up to date. People know how to administer it. It's accessible to all your staff, and they know exactly what steps need to be taken and follow. And quite frankly, I will be focusing on working at a higher level. I think that the Defence Force has taken on board a very good model which is used in the Australian Defence Force. They, of course, they started their own, had to review their own policies after high-profile sexual assault and harassment cases in the Defence Force. And they have a way where people can report to they call them SEMPRO, which is basically the people who are expert in sexual harassment, and they are the go-to people. People can either report in a restricted way, which they say, I'm just phoning up to say, I've had this issue. This is what happened to me. I don't want it to go any further, but this is what happened. They probably name people and name places and situations. And it's all documented. Of course, they're offered support, and the matter is left there. Or you can go unrestricted. They say, look, I want you to know this has happened. I want you to take this further. I want to make this official. I'm not happy about it. And of course, they're offered support. And over time, as the confidence is gained in the reporting system, more people go to unrestricted reporting and move from restricted. Now, the obvious body to do this would be WorkSafe. They're our national agents that has to make our workplace safe. I would love that they become the coordination centre for complaints, and you have these perhaps two types of complaints. Support is given to anyone that phones up, doesn't matter what type of report they provide. And also it provides, and then of course, as they can track patterns. If the same workplace keeps popping up, there's a red flag, they can choose to, they can look into that. Or if the same person who might move around, and we have issues of serial perpetrators moving around, that will pop up. Now, of course, there's going to be issues of privacy and natural justice, and they need to be worked through. But this is the idea that I'd like to see happen, and I'll certainly work to that end. And of course, WorkSafe could be also the agent that ensures that there is template policies in sexual harassment and links to training for employers. So I see workplace filling that void, and let's see what happens. But it's certainly something I feel quite passionate about. Yes. Next one, thanks. I'm going to move up. Sorry about this. Women leadership going backwards. Private sector really bad. We are actually going backwards. The Grant Thornton do a review on women in senior management, and once upon a time in 2004 we had 31%. Now we're down to 18%. It was 19% last year. We're going backwards. Women on stock exchange boards, moving only very slowly. It's going to take another 9-10 years before we get to gender equality. Let alone, and the 45% target for women directors on state sector boards has been reached, and there's going to be an announcement tomorrow by the Minister for Women about state sector boards, and I think it's because it's probably reached 50%. I wouldn't be surprised, and that's something to celebrate. But the gender stocktake that does this, looks at the number of women on state sector boards, should go further and look at the ethnicity, look at disability, look at rainbow stats, and let's get a proper idea of who's sitting on our boards, and see where the gaps are, because diversity is not just about women, it's about all people from different perspectives, different backgrounds. As I say, it's about disability, it's about ethnicity, it's whether you're Māori, Pacific, and it's about rainbow people. So we need to be inclusive of all. Okay, next one, thanks. So there's some women in leadership recommendations that we've made in our report. Some pretty obvious ones. Obviously, we need to ensure that there's high quality childcare that's affordable and it's accessible for women with children if they want to carry on in the workforce. We need to make sure there's targets, and I think there's a question I'm going to talk to shortly about temporary special measures. I would like to see NZX to up the game and actually introduce mandatory gender and diversity reporting. At the moment, it's only comply or explain, and if they don't have to, but they would have to explain why they haven't got a policy. And of course, temporary special measures, that's the next one, thanks. Yeah, this was a question about, given persisting inequalities by Pacifica, Māori and other women, what is your view on temporary special measures? Yes, I'm a fan. In respect to leadership, there's no question, as I say, we don't have all the data. There's huge gaps, we've got no idea, and I suspect women are doing very poorly as far as women from different backgrounds, such as ethnic backgrounds, whether they're disabled or rainbow. And I totally support temporary special measures. I'll tell you very quick. And I was at a global women conference earlier in the year, and we had a really good address by Marilyn Waring on quotas. Now, Global Women is a group of really high-powered women, a lot of business women, and you know, an audience where you might get mixed reviews about what they supported or not. Marilyn gave an amazing evidence-based talk, and we had a show of hands afterwards. 99% actually supported quotas. Admittedly, we didn't have the opposite view, the argument against quotas, and was just one-sided. But women stood up and said, look, you know, I didn't used to support quotas, but I do now. It was unprecedented. So it gives me hope that there is actually changes in the air. But I absolutely passionate. I think women face such unconscious bias, such entrenched views and traditions and culture, that to actually push through is going to be too hard. It could take, and sometimes impossible. So we need to disrupt change, shake the cage, make change happen, expect the pushback and the grumbling, but let women be seen as leaders in their own right, and then take away those special measures. They're only temporary, and then it's back to how the normal pattern of appointments go. But I really believe that we do need to disrupt and force change to see change happen. That's my own personal view. It's happened in the Nordic countries. They have quotas for boards. The sky hasn't fallen in. Yeah, and as I said before, as far as employment goes, for inequalities, I'd like to see those gender pay principles across the board in the private sector enshrined in legislation. I think that will make a big change. Next one, please. The question was about leadership culture, and I've really probably talked to it, but diversity is more than just European women, more European women on senior management boards or boards or whatever. Women are a diverse group, and as far as the Commission goes, women include trans women, intersex women, non-binary women, and gender diverse women. And those women have the women's rights, and we support those. So there's no question about that. We are concerned that the rainbow stats are getting overlooked, and the census was going to include some questions on gender identity and sexual orientation, and at the end of the day, there were no questions. There was one question in the General Social Survey just on gender identity, and we'd like to see the whole process simplified, where people can self-identify as far as what they identify with, which gender, whether they're gender diverse, intersex, non-binary, whatever, and that's what's happening on passports and driver's licence, but we need to push that through so it's actually it's much easier for people to identify. Next one, please. The last one is gender budgeting, and that was a question regarding what I thought about the Treasury's recommendation on gender auditing, and we certainly support that. And you know, we would like to see the Public Finance Act amended to introduce gender budgeting in the commercials, budgetary and financial process. Of course, gender budgeting will include all women, the ones I've just mentioned, so it's not just white European women. We look at all women from all backgrounds, including those ones that are particularly marginalised, so we can see the impact of how a budget might affect them. So I'll stop now. I'm sorry I've gone on longer than I expected.
Wonderful, Jackie. You've certainly shaken the cage, as they say. Before I go to committee members for questions, just a couple of wee housekeeping matters. Alfie, you crept in without introducing yourself.
Tēnā rā koutou katoa and tā lofa Alpha Lapaina Manukau Ward.
Thank you, Alfie. And Whanana Efeso Collins forgot to mention he's the deputy chair of this committee. Thanks, Efeso. And finally, I forgot to mention our last item today, after all our speakers, is our State of the Nation report, which is really 3 staff members presenting Auckland Council's response to discrimination against women. So don't go away, because that will be the most exciting bit, lots of discussion. Jackie, we're open for questions. Can you indicate if you'd like to ask a question? Greg Sears.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jackie. I've got a few questions here.
Go for
but
it.
Just trying to sheet them back to Auckland Council's responsibilities. In the work that you've done, are there any correlations between the work that you've done, the impact on the issues around gender-based violence and housing affordability? Were there any correlations that you were aware of or not there?
No, I can't say there is, but I think intuitively, and there's no excuse, I mean, basically violence occurs in all socioeconomic groups. You can't say people who, can't afford houses or are in low-paid housing or homeless are more likely to be victims or perpetrators. We can't say that, but I would say that there's sort of certain stresses that won't help the situation, and of course unemployment, low pay, would all factor into the whole picture, but that's not an excuse nonetheless, because we see violence everywhere. I mean, the warehouse who has done the first corporates to bring in family violence in the workplace policies and for their employees. They just assumed it would be the checkout operators that would be making claims, and it wasn't. It was across the whole board. And in many ways, the higher you go up, the less likely that women I say women because it's mainly women will disclose. Because if you're a senior management and you say, well, I'm a victim of family violence, you run the fear of being discriminated against. Like, well, if you can't manage your own home and life, how on earth can we put you in charge of a team? That sort of attitude. So there's huge discrimination going on. But it affects everybody, but there are obviously stresses. Alcohol's a big one too. There'll be factors that actually escalate an issue, but it doesn't explain or excuse it either, all the same.
Yes,
Thanks,
okay.
Jackie.
John? I just had another cut. Is that all right, Kat?
No, I'll come back to you,
Okay,
Greg. We'll
thanks.
we'll go through the list first.
Okay,
So I've got
thanks.
John, then I've got Tony, and then Alfie.
Thanks, Jackie. Just in respect of your reference to the domestic violence rates in New Zealand, if we put them in amongst our other rates to do with bullying, incarceration, youth suicide, etc., it presents a pretty depressing picture. Can you tell us, A, where New Zealand rates in the developed world in respect of that, and what other countries, if any, have turned around such a disturbing kind of national malaise across a whole range of social areas?
We're one of the worst. I can't really talk to, out of how many countries it is, but it's been quoted often. We are one of the most violent countries in the world, in the developed country. I don't know of any country that's turning it around, but I know that we had an expert come to New Zealand a few years ago who said, you know what, you have got the ability to be the leader in this. You're small, you're agile, you have one government, not like Australia's got 24 different states, and also you're not corrupt. You've got a government which is democratic, one government. You can actually be world leading, and I believe we can. And that's, I very much want a cross-party accord. So this doesn't get changed every 3, 6, 9 years, and you start again afresh, and then it gets changed the next time round. And I believe that the Minister of Justice did acknowledge that the work the previous government had done, and I'm hoping they will just pick it up and carry with their own work program. But and I know that we've got an Undersecretary now that's been appointed for family violence and sexual violence. That's amazing that we've got a dedicated minister or Undersecretary who's focused on this issue. But I heard of one very interesting case study in Uganda from memory called the SASA study, and they took two community groups. One group they gave lots of interventions to. They gave anger management, they gave pamphlets, education. They worked with this group hugely on interventions in the community about respect, relationships, everything. The other group was left alone, and they recorded before and after their attitudes to violence and experiences, and there'd been a huge improvement in the one that had all those interventions. So it can be done. We've done it with drinking and driving. We've done it with smoking. There's no reason why we can't do it with violence.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Tony.
Kia ora, Dr. Jackie Blue. Thank you for your presentation, and I guess you were going really well for me right along the whole presentation until you said we can't say that comment anymore. Whereas I think you can. I think just at the end there, you said you can't, your comment around that we shouldn't say that, but I was really enthusiastic about your presentation until you said that.
What comment?
They can't say that kind of comment. So I think I'm supporting your drive to actually let's say it.
Oh, well,
Let's be out there. Let's continue to kind of call it for what it is.
Right.
And get we want to create a culture where we call it out if we need to. If it's a Māori issue, if it's a Pacific issue, if it's a Māori Wahine issue, call it.
Yep.
And I'm right behind you, particularly in the domestic violence situation.
And whether it's sexual harassment in the workplace or family violence, bystanders are critically important. They can actually reduce the harm by calling it out, pulling the person aside, and going and intervening. Bystanders have a huge role to play. Everyone.
I'm trying to create a culture in this country where we actually let's confront our issues up front. Let's call it out. Let's create call it for what it is, particularly around the family violence stuff. It's huge, and I just wasn't pleased to hear your statistics, but I can relate to it, you know. And I think, but even more so, hear the solutions. Don't wait for everyone else to come up with the solutions. Let's call the solutions as well.
Last question from Alfie.
Dr. Blue, look, early on in your presentation, you ended up having that question which was posed, which area of discrimination against women, that particular question, and then you gave some bullet points. The first two was gender-based violence in employment.
Yeah.
You then put in another slide around recommendation. Now the fourth bullet point that you put in there was aligned with Māori kaupapa.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I raced over it.
Oh, no, look, that's fine. My comment through you, Chair, is that I had a very good discussion with one of our fire from up north. I'm actually from up north. But I had a very good discussion with our fire. I won't mention her name, but the discussion was around Māori kaupapa, around separations for children, but also violence. And her comment was that our kaupapa is to keep the families together. So my argument is that sometimes it is not the best thing to do in a family violence or even a custody situation about keeping the whānau together. So I just wanted to make sure that hopefully that is something that we do. I also, around the same thing around family harm, and I'm dealing with a young lady whose partner got locked up last night. It was his second assault on her. First one is in December of last year, where she has got no clothes for her two children, no clothes for her because the partner's parents said, no, you can't enter the house. Now, I know that whangaia ngā pāharakeke, the project that we have family harm across, especially counties. I can talk about counties, but it's across Tāmaki Makaurau. Can I suggest again, it's around talking to those particular people around the family violence. And my last comment, sorry, Chair, is Harvey Weinstein around the Me Too movement, #MeToo. I think it's important that we end up looking at what's gone before us, especially if we're looking at the 4 years with the pamphlet here. So those are just my humble comments around it. But again, I'm like Tony, the presentation itself is awesome, but just need to be aware of a few things, and those are the ones that I would suggest that we just don't, sometimes it's better looking in-house than going out to have a look at things. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alfie. Very last question from Richard. Quick.
Thank you, Dr. Blue. I guess it's sort of a bit of a helplessness question around. I think I met you first time with the Roastbusters March and a few other issues. And we get to the Me Too, and we get to the discussion on it's always about merit, but we always end up with 70% men everywhere. It clearly can't be about merit. How do we get to a place where this stuff is normal? Because I feel we get to a point and then we get Trump, or we get to a point and we see the vitriolic nature against the Prime Minister and her baby, or whatever it is. How do we manage to keep, well, especially young women, I mean, I don't know what it feels like, but how do we keep it going when there's such big bumps in the road that kind of hang around?
You've got to obviously got to take people with you, and that includes men and boys as well, and you need those champions. It just can't be women talking amongst ourselves saying, this is terrible, this problem, what we can do about it. we actually have to work together, and it starts, you know, from everyone, and it's everyone's responsibility, not just government, but and not just families or communities. It's everyone, individuals, being a bystander, intervening. You know, not accepting put downs, you know, on the verbal sort of abuse, and role modelling what should be happening in society. Legislation's not going to solve the problem. It's going to help, but it's not going to solve the problem. That needs to come from us. But you can do, the council can do this by having a family violence policy for your employees. You're a big employer, 5 to 10,000 people. You've got victims and you've got perpetrators here in the organisation. And some corporates, you know, it's up to you, your policy. We've actually launched a website in conjunction with corporates on templates, policy templates. And there's one for perpetrators. You can mix and match what suits you as an organisation. I can send you the link, have a look at it. And some companies would say, look, if you're genuine about wanting to change your behaviour, we'll absolutely make time available for you to attend these courses in management and so forth. So, yeah, I think the workplace is a crucial part of it. But the next generation coming through, I'm not going to stand for it, I hope. No way.
Thank you very much, Jackie,
Okay,
and I
thank
hope
you.
that you can stay to, no, wait there. I hope you can stay for our State of the Nation address by our staff at the end of the day. But by way of thank you, you know how the Mayor's been planting 1 million trees around Auckland? Well, we have a dwarf Ko-Fi. We've already planted 174,000. Jackie's getting number 174,001. And it says on it, you are 1 in a million. So thank you very much. So now it's my great delight to turn to the next item of the agenda. Oh no, we've got to move. Thank you. Would somebody like to move? Yep. Tony, seconded by Efeso. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. And now we're on to item 10, and I'm going to turn over the meeting to Ramari Slattery, who's the head of Strategic Portfolio and Programme Office. And I'll welcome to the seats our panel of 4. We've got Christine King. Do come forward, Christine, from Pacific Women's Watch. Whitney Adam from Women in Urbanism. Thank you, Whitney, for coming. Cinnamon Whitlock from the Māori Women's Welfare League. And Tangaloa Tele, Professor Peggy Fairburn Dunlop. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Looking forward to this. So just give us a couple of minutes to get organised. Sound check.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, we can't hear the speaker. So if you could please turn your mic on. I also note there's 3 chairs over there, and I also note we have local board members sitting in the audience. So I wonder if they could come up and use those chairs. And I acknowledge the Deputy Chair of my local board, Debbie Burrows, sitting in the audience. So I wonder if that can be accommodated, please, Madam Chair.
Come on up.
Yeah, sure. Oh, absolutely. Go. I'm just worried about the sound.
I think I saw Debbie, Julia Parfit's out there. Yes. Angela Full-James, are you out there? I think they're all women as well. Any other local board members?
Jess from our
Jess. Jess. There's Jess out there. Yep. So there's 3 chairs here. There's a chair here as well.
Just the others will miss out now.
This one good?
Yeah, sure. Just will.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is this one good?
Caitlin's out there.
Yeah,
Okay. Caitlin, want to come up as well?
where?
Not you, Mike, only women. Joking.
Pull it out.
I've got enough men sitting on this side with me.
It's discrimination, isn't it?
Ramari, can you just check your sound, please?
Yes.
Something called positive discrimination.
Positive view.
Okay, let's get started. So we'll start with the introduction of the panel members.
Still can't hear.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity, Madam Chair. I'm Christine King, and I'm the immediate past president of Pacific Women's Watch New Zealand. Now, you might say, why is a white Palangi Pakeha woman talking about the Pacific? New Zealand is part of the Pacific. We're part of the Pacific in terms of the UN and in the world. And this group was set up back in 2001, following on the Beijing Platform for Action, the Beijing meeting, and we needed to have some representation from this part of the world. The Pacific bit was missing. Then in 2010, Jane Pritchard led a group, and we got ECOSOC Special Consultative Status at the UN. Now, ECOSOC is the Economic and Social Council of the UN, and we report directly to them. It gives us some privileges at the UN, which is quite nice. So we monitor and report on the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. We look at other UN outcome documents, and this year is 70 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And every one of these documents that we look at comes out of that. So we've got the human rights, we've got the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the Convention on the Rights of the Disabled, or the Declaration of, the Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, and so on. And of course, CEDAW, which was established in 1979. There's also, more recently, the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, and they cut across all of these as well. So we're looking at them as well. And we've got number 5 and number 11 that are probably the most useful here. And we try to ensure that the voices of the most marginalised are heard. I think I'll stop there.
Kia ora everyone, my name is Whitney Adam, and I'm here representing women in urbanism. So I'm just going to start off with a really bold statement. So we think that the way our cities are planned are sexist. And so we're here to get a conversation going about that. We are a grassroots, non-partisan, volunteer-based organisation. We're also unpaid. So we represent women in the urban industries, so engineering, architecture, planning, and we also represent women in the community. We're not just a group who get together and have fun little networking wine and cheese nights, a bit more than that. We have 2 arms, so we have our industry arm where we're trying to promote women in the engineering, planning, architecture industry in leadership roles and also representation. We also have a community arm, and that's more advocacy based. So we're here to call out bad decisions, and we're also here to guide the way that our cities are planned, and that's from small design-based decisions right up to how our cities operate. I think that's us.
Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou. Ko Cinnamon Whitlock taku ingoa no Ngāpuhi Ngāti Kahu ahau. Kia ora. I'm really honoured to be here with you all today, and I want to pay homage and just to recognise and acknowledge the council here, all the councillors, and of course Jackie Blue, and shortly of course the Right Honourable Helen Clark. I'm sure many of us are here not only for the kōrero that's coming from this particular panel, but of course for Jackie's kōrero, but probably there's a little bit more enthusiasm for the Right Honourable Helen Clark, which is not surprising, do I say it? I hail from up north, and I'm really honoured to be representing the Māori Women's Welfare League. Te rōpū wahine Māori. Toko e te ora. I'm incredibly honoured. I want to just and acknowledge also our rangatira, the Madam President, who is Prue Kapua, who's unable to be here today, but also just to be aware of the mana and the importance of her role in advancing the kōrero and advancing the position for Māori as tangata whenua as First Nations peoples and as Indigenous people. So I acknowledge her and am grateful to be here. Kia ora.
Talo whalawa, ta te awele mua le tua I lona lofa, malana anga lei e mawhaina ma whaatasi ringa I putuputunga. Thank you very much for the invitation, and can I congratulate, please, Auckland City Council on the plans which I've been reading here, and also on having this this event today, particularly, I guess, for Pacific. It is very important given that Auckland is the largest Polynesian city in the world, and also given the fact that given the fact that we are the largest population in the world in Auckland, so it's very fitting that the Auckland City Council paved the way. Pacifica, I would like to say that many of you may not know what Pacifica is, so the acronym is Pacific Allied Women's Concerns Inspires Faith in Ideals Concerning All, was established in 1977 in New Zealand when the first Pacific migrants were in New Zealand. Settling in New Zealand. And even when we look at it from that perspective, we sort of actually have to ask, how are Pacific peoples defined in New Zealand today, given that over probably about 60% now are New Zealand born? Are we still migrants, given that we have third, fourth, sixth generation families? So when I look at the CEDAW report and reports like that, I really have to say, who are these reports speaking to? Whose experiences are they documenting? The other little stat is that over 40% of our population are under 15. And then there's a central group and then quite a lot are aged. So what are the aims of Pacifica? To go back in the early days, it was very much integration into the New Zealand way of life. And it's almost the same today, I would suggest. And when we look at CEDAW, the Pacific is very committed to CEDAW for three reasons, which are not actually often stated, but should always be a reminder. In terms of equity and rights, yes, that is one reason for CEDAW. The second huge reason is that women's experiences are different from males. And so when you get the male experiences and the female experiences, any council or any family has a much better chance of making reasoned decisions. And so that's the third one, goes into planning. So yes, it is a right, but secondly, we all have different experiences, and if we put those together, your basket of knowledge and mine, we make for, well, we have more potential for creative decisions and decisions that are relevant to all. I think the third thing I would say, that when we talk about gender equity, and a lot of the approaches that I've just been rereading and listening to Dr. Jackie, thank you. A lot of our approaches are focusing on women. And when you really think about it, if you want to achieve gender equity, really it's women and males working together, isn't it? And especially most of the research I do more recently has been on gender violence, violence against women, family violence, family security. And always, you must actually not just take the male role or the female role, it's actually looking at the relationships between them both. So our aims, Pacifica, for the past and the present, our aims and our role is to speak to Pacific values and to give hope to our Pacific families and who came to this land of plenty. So that is Pacifica today. Strong women, strong families, strong communities, and a stronger New Zealand. Yeah, whakataimole awa noa.
Now we've established we've got a power-packed panel. Let's get into the questions. So the first question that I'd like you to think about... Sorry, you hear me now?
Yeah.
First question we'd like to explore is, in the context of the challenges identified in the CEDAW reports, tell us about one or two things in your organisation that you're doing to support the women that you serve. Who would like to start?
The sort of things that we do, we are initiating and participating in programs to advance women's rights. We work very closely with other groups. We partner with the Māori Women's Welfare League. In fact, the new president of Pacific Women's Watch is also a member of the league, and Denise is currently somewhere in the air between here and Geneva on her way to front up to the committee that Jackie mentioned before. We also work with disability groups. I've got some of my people over there, and Shakti, which is the Asian women's group, LGBTI, trans women, and of course the National Council of Women, and they've been very, very supportive in this whole process, and they also are on their way to Geneva. We do education and promotion of issues, workshops. We've had, the most recent one was writing, teaching women, giving them the skills to write at a very high level. And we see this as something that they need to be able to do to promote things to government. Conferences and statements, we do annual statements to the CSW, and we have done our Status of Women report. That's the addendum, actually. We've got a whole report as well. And we've put out the little CEDAW leaflets that a lot of you have seen around. This is trying to explain to women what is CEDAW, what it's all about, what it means for them. We've currently got it in 3 languages, English, Māori and Samoan. We're about to do the Tongan if we can find a translator. So we monitor and report on things. So our report was, annually we go to the Commission on the Status of Women. We take women there, we've done parallel events, those sorts of things. We do a quadrennial report to CEDAW, as I've mentioned, an alternative one. We report on the Universal Periodic Review. And we also, the things that we've highlighted, particularly in the CEDAW report, is the need for a national plan of action for women. This is now nearly 10 years overdue to be redone. And every year the Commission has, CEDAW has said they must do it, and they haven't. We've reported on the situation for Māori women, and it was very interesting when we were doing the addendum. We discovered that there's actually quite a lot of Māori women are leading their iwi groups, and they're at quite a high level. The Māori women are doing better than the Pākehā women in governance and leadership. So Denise could count up 10, but she thought there were more. So that's a really good one to have there. We talked about women in the law, and that came up in Jackie's presentation. And we have been able to talk also about the issues for migrant and ethnic minority women, some of the issues that they face, and some of those have been highlighted in the paper just recently. Some of the women who are here married to workers, and now the new legislation, if they haven't got the right level of income, they're not going to be able to stay. And so there's various issues for women around those sorts of, can they work here? Who are they responsible to? Who looks after them? And we try to address those issues as well. We also try to make, we work with the National Council of Women making statements on legislation. So there's various ways that we work with the women.
I suppose in terms of CEDAW and women in urbanism, just harking back to the basic definition of what discrimination is, as stated in the CEDAW, part of that is about exclusion or restriction based on sex. So I just want to start off by using a story of someone that I was speaking with recently. Just remembering that women live longer, women are more likely to experience financial hardship. And then leading on from that, this based on an Auckland Council report in 2012, Auckland residents aged over 50 are severely lonely, and almost 45% are moderately lonely. Those stats gets worse if you're women, Asian or Māori, or you have limited mobility. This leads to mental health issues. So just setting the scene with this, this person, and this is a common story that I think we can all relate to. This woman is in her 70s, newly retired. She lives in the northern part of Auckland in suburban sprawl. She's not been able to drive for 8 months. This is due to a medical issue. She wants to go to a social event in Eastern Auckland. So what are her options? A 2-hour bus, actually multiple buses, changing buses in the dark by herself, $106 Uber ride each way, or again relying on friends to take her. So in the end she didn't go, and these sorts of decisions lead to social isolation. So what we're talking about here is the intersect between how our cities are planned and arranged and how they're affecting women in our cities differently or disproportionately. In terms of what women in urbanism are doing to address this issue, I think first and foremost we are starting a conversation. We're starting a conversation that's been missing for a really long time, and there's a lot of appetite for this conversation. Conversation is in the form of campaigns, events. We've had some really great speakers come and speak with us. We're also working with government organisations currently in workshops to bring to the front a woman's lens on the planning of our city. We've been profiling through media, so you may have seen we've been recently in Forbes, RNZ, News Hub, Viva, Motor City and Spin-Off, to name a few, and that's just in the past 6 months or so. We're building a network, and like I said, there's a lot of appetite for that network. That network did not exist here in Aotearoa, and we want to continue to grow it strongly. Also, an important part of this is gathering evidence. So we consult regularly with researchers, academics, and experts in the community. We actually recently ran our own transport survey to gather information and evidence about how women experience the city. And most respondents, about 300, were from Auckland. Did you know that over 70% of those respondents said that they have been sexually harassed on our transport network? Also, there was an overwhelming demand for walking and cycling from those respondents. I think finally I'd like to point out that thinking about this question, how is women in urbanism addressing this issue? Why is it up to advocacy organisations who are volunteer-run and doing this in our own time to solve the issue? What I'd like to point out is that women in urbanism are here to bring to the front what the issues are and to help guide solving the issue, but we're not here to solve it or to tick a box.
Sid.
Just to add to my introduction, just to mention that the Māori Women's Welfare League spans, of course, 67 years and has its origin in part by statute, but has firmly been grasped by our founding leaders, the patron, Princess Tupuia, and the first national president, Dame Whina Cooper. The Māori Women's Welfare League was established in 1951. It is a body politic. It is definitely an undisputed national taonga and one of the few surviving Māori institutions that has endured global financial crisis, changing governments, Māori urbanisation, commentary around Māori not ceding sovereignty, the emergence and rise of Te Reo Māori, Tikanga Māori and Kohanga Reo as movements that see us through. It is, however, and cannot be disputed, that long before New Zealand's women's suffrage, wahine Māori were equally involved in planning and in leading trade and expansion expeditions. They were engaged in land debates and were active participants in the signing of both the Declaration of Independence, 1835, and our founding document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi. It is important to note these things, but it's also important to embrace our history our colonial past. As we've heard already, we talk and the conversations have been very much framed within inequalities, within a need framework. For Māori, it's really important, and for the League, our mahi is wanting to advance the kaupapa around strengths, around recognising the place and value that Māori has, that wahine Māori have and young girls and whānau have, not from a point of being disadvantaged, not from a place of being vulnerable, but from a position of power, from a position that recognises that Māori are the tangata whenua here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. For too long, we have been set as a part of a collective and a group where we are seen to be with the marginalised. We are with the marginalised, sadly, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's impugnant upon us all, and I would ask that we all reconsider our perspective and our view on how we look at issues pertaining to Māori, because effectively they are issues pertaining to all of us as New Zealanders. We are talking about the advancement of not only a population that hails its home from here, but also a country and a nationhood. In saying that, CDAW, in terms of the articles, the 16 articles, all 16 articles from the perspective of the Māori Women's Welfare League need to be framed through a treaty lens. There is no one particular article that adds more weight than the other. Every single article is shy of what it should be and could be. I want to acknowledge the work that Christine has done and the work of Pacific Women's Watch, absolutely. And I think we're on to an incredible, amazing time should we progress. But it comes down to clearly all of us wanting to take the prerogative to advance Māori, not as the other, but as the treaty partner.
Māloa, Pacifica, everything you have said, and in everything we do, we always acknowledge that we are not the people of this land, and we have our origins in other places, but you are first. So just to go back a bit, I'm going to just speak very briefly. We have been asked what we see as important. So from Pacifica, I'm one of the founding members of Newtown as my branch, and more recently when I came to Auckland, I'm now at the South Branch, Manukau, that is our branch. So that is where I'm coming from the early days in the 1970s when me and my 5 daughters were young, through to national president fairly recently, and then now South and Newtown. But Pacific women, as you have said for the Māori, have always been the mediators, if you like, the connectors, and in New Zealand, the connectors between the families and life in New Zealand. And in the early years, I think Pacifica was the place where Pacific women learnt the processes, systems, responsibilities and entitlements of living in New Zealand, especially important when for many of them English was the second language. Pioneer member Jasmine Underhill from Pororua, when asked about Pacifica, said that Pacifica was the place where women, Pacific women, met and socialised, shared their news from home and their homesickness, talked about the uncertainties, how to use stoves, cooking recipes, the relationship between keeping the heater on all day and electricity bills, and about the closest doctors and schools. So in sum, Pacifica supported Pacific women learn the roles, rules and responsibilities of living in New Zealand and the entitlements and how to access these for the good of their families. So now, as requested, I'm going to focus on a CEDAW-related activity and talk about what Pacifica may have done, and I've chosen Pacific women and decision-making or political participation. So in Pacific branch and national activities, Pacific women came to understand first the importance of Pacific participation in decision-making and to share this importance with their families, almost a democratic system, I guess. We learned very, very quickly that if you're not at the table, then you are on the table. Women also learnt the pathways to political participation and practice, the formal strategies, protocols of participation and decision-making in New Zealand, the steps, supports, procedures, the minutes, the voting, when to speak and when to keep quiet, the intricacies and the intrigues of lobbying. And in that process, we have also learnt the power and importance and value of the Pacific voice, generally, but in New Zealand as well. And related to that, that the Pacific voice must be informed. We need to know what is going on locally and in Pacific communities before we offer any Pacific view. And thirdly, and a very important one for Pacific women in a new country, I think, was that we came to understand and practice that political leadership and decision-making was not just for males, that women had a place in the New Zealand systems as well. And so now I sort of refer to Paddy Walker, very strategically started setting steps for Pacific women to emulate and to step into leadership roles in New Zealand. She was the first national president, and she was Auckland-based, and she fostered and developed the support systems here. Also, I must note the Māori Women's Welfare League, the Pepisua, National Council of Women and Church Committees, who all through our development have been our strong partners and allies in everything we do, our big sisters, I guess. So today, so if I look at local government in Porirua, there was a trickle of what I'll call bold, courageous Pacific women in the 70s and 80s. I will say a few names, but I'm sure to miss someone. Jacinta Underhill, Tala Cleverly, Elaine Annandale, and coming through to today, could I also mention Josephine, who is sitting here, who has been a long-time Vice President of Pacifica and just does absolutely fabulous work out in Tamaki. Really miss you, and I must recognise your excellence in this field and in Pacific security generally. But so we've sort of stepped through, if you like, and today there are 7 Pacific MPs hold cabinet-related posts, 4 female, as opposed to 3 males. And I would particularly like to say that, so it's within Pacifica that Pacific women have learnt how to organise and present our voice in New Zealand and develop the networks. At the branch level, very, very quickly, there are, in our view, many, many, many levels of decision-making, of showing service or leadership, and many, many champions, and people have different preferred levels of participation. Not everyone is suited or wants to be in politics. So at the I'm going to talk about the South Campus branch where I've been for the last few years. Our strategy there has been to support women's political participation. So every year and every election, we have held forums where women from every party can come and present their views, and they have been particularly valuable. But at the same time, our focus has been very strongly on school boards, health boards, and that's where we have had quite a significant amount of success. And again, male and female participation. So that's what I'd like to say. And just 2 things. I guess the other thing that has been shown in our Pacific women's participation is that not only are we sitting there on those boards, not only have we got in, when I listen to stories that the Pacific women share and other people share, we are also helping, as Māori women are, transform the mainstream processes. And that is the other extremely important bit about the whole CDAW, that we're not only just there because we should be there, but we are also helping transform the processes. So just to take a very short story, one of our women from the South Branch was elected to a secondary school council in South, and when she came back, I said to her, how has it been? And she said, I should have been there, or we should have been there years ago. She said, I did not realise the power these boards wield today. Secondly, she said, and the way they made their decisions was also I won't say the word she used, but slightly questionable. And that's what we have learnt, that if we're not there to present our view, then other people will speak for us. And when they speak for us, thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got about 20 minutes left. The second question is around what is one or two key priorities that you would like to see being progressed? I might start from that end and come back this way.
Ka pai. I think the main priority for the League in terms of CEDAW is really around addressing the imbalance around power. Power from an economic base, power from a political base, power from an educational base. What we'd like to do is be able to infiltrate and influence at all levels. And because we represent 14.9% of the population, in Tāmaki Makaurau we're about 164,000 people that identify as being Māori. Of that 164,000 that are Māori, we know that 1/4 or 25% of that population group essentially are, I just want to make sure I'm right. Sorry, I've lost that train of thought. But I do know, however, that 50% of the Māori population here in Tāmaki Makaurau are under the age of 25. Now that's significant. We're a young, growing population. 1/3 of the Māori population in Tāmaki Makaurau are under 15. So we have a lot of babies and we have a lot of mahi to do. When we heard before from Jackie and from many others here and elsewhere around the fact that generally we know that Māori with Pacific, but Māori are leading the table in terms of statistics, the negative statistics. The place and value put upon that data is important, but it also needs to be captured through a lens of recognising and understanding the impact of colonisation and how this has not happened overnight. It's happened over a period of time where policies and legislation and people have come in and literally taken our land, our culture and our language. That has had an impact upon Māori as tangata whenua. That impact is currently being played out. And if we think we're naive enough to see or to think that that doesn't have an impact, that colonisation does not have an impact, Lordy knows where we've got our head, but it's probably close to the sand. The reality for Māori, in order to address and to improve and advance our kaupapa, is that Māori needs to lead that kaupapa. Māori needs to be involved in the decision making. So I would like to commend the Independent Māori Statutory Board and Council. It's an incredible and important role that the board plays, but it can't be the only mechanism for advancement for Māori. It has to be measured and it has to be based on ensuring that Māori have a voice at all levels, and that more importantly those frameworks are based on Māori as being the Indigenous peoples. So for the League, it is about redressing power. It is about sharing the load and sharing the resources so that effectively wahine Māori know what to do. We as Māori know what to do for the advancement of Māori, and that has to be enabled. So again, as I had said before, it's about rectifying the wrong, redress, and ensuring that the distribution is fair and just. Other than that, clearly it's also about ensuring that our culture, our values are recognised and that we're giving a standing place within our society.
Okay, So I suppose, just in answering that question, we think that if you plan a city for women, you actually plan for everyone. So what we would like to see in the long term is we'd like to see Auckland, and actually all our cities in New Zealand, apply gender mainstreaming. If you haven't heard of that term before, it's basically applying a gendered lens onto how our cities operate and how they're designed. This actually exists in other countries. Vienna and Stockholm are two examples where there are dedicated departments within council who have gender mainstreaming, so they apply that to their city planning. We'd also like to see quite a big focus on safety for women. So as I mentioned before, we think it's shocking that just out of 300 respondents on our survey that we did, 70% have been sexually harassed. Now, I don't think that's being shown in any reporting from the council as such, but that needs to be addressed, and we as women need to feel safe when we're moving about the city. And when I say transport, I don't mean just taking a train from A to B, I mean also walking down the street, feeling safe riding a bike. We would also like to see genuine engagement with women, and when I say engagement, I mean understanding of how women use and experience the city. The story that I was referring to before of the woman who was not able to drive because of medical reasons, that sort of harks back to the issue that Auckland and many other cities in New Zealand and actually in the world are planned for cars. They're completely arranged around cars as a form of mobility, and that's not how women want to get around, and that's not how we do get around. So we would like to see more of a genuine understanding of how women want and do get around. I suppose on the industry front, we'd also like to see more women representation. Just a couple of stats. In Aotearoa, there are 15% of city mayors are women, 20% district mayors. In the architecture field, women representation is 29%, only 14% in engineering. And then if you break it down, there are even fewer Māori, Pacifica and Asian women who are represented in those industries. We think it's important that women are represented in the design, the city planning industry, because we get a chance to be able to make decisions about how the city affects us and other women. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. For my second review, if you like, of CEDAW and its relevance, I guess, to planning here, I went back to and I'm going to talk to the list of questions, the consideration of reports submitted by state parties to the New Zealand report. I see that is very, very important. And number two, and this is from the CEDAW committee to the New Zealand last report, and this is what they write. They refer to the intersecting forms of discrimination, and they refer to the fact that New Zealand did not have the data or a tracking of the intersecting forms of discrimination against women. So what do I mean by that? When you look at actual CEDAW issues, they are not in little silos, as has already been said. There's a relationship or an intersecting before between the whole lot. For example, education is the necessary, if you like, that's the necessary form, if you like, to all success. I remember at a Māori Women's Welfare League I spoke to once that the president said, you know, the new BA is the old school C. And when I looked at it, I thought, gee, I wish I'd said that, because that's the truth of it, isn't it? And so what we really, you know, so education, education is not only to get a job, but it's the only way you get a job these days. You don't even get past the first hurdle if you don't have something there. But it's also access to information for communities. What we know that there is a relationship between education and the number of children, for example, and education and access to support mechanisms. Often we didn't even know about them, and I'm thinking there now particularly has been mentioned disabilities entitlements, for example. Many people in Pacific communities do not actually know about them. We sort of need that sort of access. But to go on, so from education is linked to economic security. Most of our, as has already been said, most of our, or many of our Pacific families are extremely cash-strapped. We go for any jobs we can get in the informal sector anywhere, exploited in the workforce, because we have no supports to go back to. And if we think about housing, our housing is back in the homelands. Our lands for gardens and that are back in the homelands. And in New Zealand, we have the additional costs of housing and those sorts of things on a much lower wage limit. I'm not even going to go into the data. The data has already been said. Then if we go from there, from education to economic security and to health, I mean, who goes to the doctor? We've just looked at the dental statistics in New Zealand, which are pretty grim. But Pacific, who goes to the doctor? It's certainly not women, and it may not be the children. And to go on to the next bit, in the health sector, there is the extremely strong relationship between economic security and domestic and family violence. And that's in every country in the world, not just in Auckland, not just in New Zealand. So again, you've got all these relationships of data. And to go back to the CEDAW report back to New Zealand of their issues, that there was a lack of attention or evidence in the CEDAW report, and I don't know about the Auckland City Council, about the intersection of those sorts of factors. And that's the important thing if we're talking, I believe, about dealing with domestic violence. I was amazed last week in the Herald to read Tamahere's statement, if many of you read it, that I'm actually paying more tax than how many, that a lot of the really rich people in New Zealand, not the little rich like me, are only declaring 70,000 as their incomes, and all the tax rorts which are worked around that. And then I think of the Pacific ladies I know who might have 2 or 3 jobs and work the evening, and where do we go from there? So how do we deal with these relationships, these cross-cutting, intersecting relationships? And that's why when I was asked for a question, I went back to say, and I suggest that New Zealand and probably the Auckland City Council, there is a need to deal and to consider and reconsider the temporary measures. New Zealand has never given credibility to that particular one, and it was up there before, and Dr. Jackie acknowledged that. I think, so to conclude, I guess the next thing to me is what is measured in CEDAW and what is measured in many of the accounts we have. When Pacific, you don't count the things that Pacific are good at. And within the measurements that are held, often you do not account for the strengths that are within that. All we can see are other deficiencies and what we cannot do. Whereas if you look at both sides, the constraints, if you like, but also the enablers are where we go from. So my last question is, or my last comment is, what is not measured? Cultural strengths are not measured. Creative strengths, sports. I mean, it would be quite nice to get some sort of a measurement of what we do well, wouldn't it, before we go forward? I've also noticed, yeah, you always, I remember once when I was younger, when CEDAW came out and great Pacific Islander woman, Whana Kingston, great educator, I was going to say, talked about if you could actually do your whole school curriculum from netball. She was a PIC netballer, and I'm a netballer as well. She said, because when you get netball that the girls love, or males love now as well, then you can do your whole maths curriculum. The whole lot can stir from that love. So find something which people like and go from there. I think that's about all I need to say. We've talked about issues of safety, we've talked about youth. But actually, I would like to finish, can I say one more thing? Thank you.
We've only got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, when I just came in and I downloaded from, I don't know, it just sort of landed on my desk. It was something from Australia, which is very relevant to Pacific today, and it talked about the intergenerational effects. And they were talking about Vietnamese in Australia. And they said what we have to look at now is the intergenerational effects. That when we're talking about Vietnamese women, we're talking about often the women who came many years ago whose experience is nothing like the experiences of the young women today. And so where do we plot our strategies? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I wanted just to say to Auckland Council, you serve a very large population, a very big part of New Zealand, and if you could commit to ensuring that the principles of CEDAW are implemented, you'll enhance the lives of many, many New Zealanders. Congratulate you on the fact that you're moving towards a living wage at long last. That's fantastic. It's going to bring women's incomes up. Great, well done. And it ties in with all the principles of CEDAW. It ties in with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think I'll just finish by saying, please put a gender lens over things, along with the cultural lens and all the other lenses we need. Thank you.
Let's give a really good warm clap for that.
Well, I'd just like to say, Christine Whitney, Cinnamon and Tangaloa Tela, thank you so much. That was illuminating. And we very much would like you to have a cup of tea with us and join us for Helen Clark at the table, and join us for the report from staff on the very things that you mentioned. Before you go though, you know the 174,000 trees? we have for each of you a wee dwarf Ko-fi, no kauri, sorry, a wee dwarf Ko-fi, and they're each numbered and they'll be presented to you by Ramari. They only grow to about 1 metre tall, and they're just beautiful. Bring in the tui. And I'm delighted to move that we receive the presentations, seconded by Josephine. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Now, we're going to break for a cup of tea. There is a tea and biscuit for everybody. Love you to be back in your seats for 3:40. 3:40, and we'll start at 3:45 on the dot. Thank you very much. Oh, there's tea and coffee. Welcome back to the second part of our committee meeting today, and it's my absolute delight to welcome Helen Clark. As you know, I'm the councillor for Albert Eden Roskill, and we've got a mighty trend of producing fine members of Parliament, including Helen Clark for, what, 28 years? And Phil Goff for how many up there? 32 years. Jacinda Ardern for recently, but we've got out of that, and David Shearer. So there's 4 Labour Party leaders, 2 Prime Ministers. Good on us. To introduce Helen, I'd like to invite her long-term colleague and friend, Phil Goff, Mayor of Auckland.
Well, thank you very much, Cathy and councillors, local body members and ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to introduce Helen, that would be presumptuous. You all know her, and you all know a lot about her history. And what I want to do is welcome Helen here. I think it's hugely appropriate that Helen should be here for this special meeting of the Community Development and Safety Committee, where we're commemorating 125 years since women got the suffrage in New Zealand. And that is an occasion, I think, worthy of celebrating. And we could not have chosen a stronger person to help us celebrate than Helen Clark for what she has contributed within New Zealand and internationally as a leader and as a person absolutely committed to gender equity and a whole heap of progressive causes. There's 3 of us here, actually. I should mention the 3rd member of the triumvirate. It's Richard Northey. Where's Richard? Yeah. Richard, Helen and I were all in the political studies department in the 1970s. Richard came first, then Helen, and I was the youngster at the end of the process. It's only just a slight margin, I've got to say, in deference to Helen. But we were very active, both through Young Labour and in the political studies department, and that's where I first got to know Helen. We looked a little bit similar in those days. I think your hair was slightly longer than mine, Helen, but there wasn't. Not much. There was only a few centimetres in it. But we were actively involved in the causes of the day, and a lot of those causes were international. It was about the anti-apartheid movement, and we were strongly opposed to apartheid and opposed to New Zealand to having sporting links with teams selected on a race basis. We were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement. We were involved in the anti-nuclear movement. And Helen always had a passion for international politics and international causes, about how we could make the world a safer, a more stable, and a more peaceful and a just place. But there were issues beyond that. The issues were also about what we could do in New Zealand, what we could do to make New Zealand a more inclusive and a fairer place, what we could do. It was like it was generations ago in terms of issues like gender equity and sexual orientation. It was still a criminal offence to be gay in New Zealand at that time, and that was very much on the agenda that we were following through in Young Labour and through the Political Studies Department. Both Helen and I entered Parliament in the same year, 1981. Seems like a little while ago now, Helen. And we entered representing the neighbouring electorates, the holy city of Mount Roskill and the more secular city of Mount Albert. I think Helen would agree with that description. It was a fair representation. I think Keith Hay may have been mayor of Mount Roskill at that point, or his son. But we went through the turbulent years of the 1980s together. We endured the political wilderness of the 1990s together. And in 1999, Helen was the first elected woman Prime Minister in New Zealand. And that's worth a round of applause in itself. About Helen through that period of time was her utter commitment and her total focus in the job and her legendary working hours. I used to work, and still do, work pretty long days, and whenever the phone rang at my desk after midnight, I didn't have to look at the digital identification. I knew it was Helen. She was the only person that would ring me at my desk after midnight. But she led that government and some significant changes in New Zealand through that period, 9 years in government, at the end of which I believe Helen left New Zealand a fairer and a better country as a result of her efforts. After leaving the Prime Ministership, Helen inevitably looked for ways in which she should exert her energy other than in opposition, which is a fairly frustrating position to be in. And in 2009, she was elected as the first woman administrator of the United Nations Development Programme and the first New Zealander to hold such an influential position on the international scene. And again, Helen just continued with her tireless efforts towards social and economic development in developing countries and towards trying to ensure, and this is a big task, that the UNDP was turned from the bureaucratic monster that many of the international bodies are to a body that was more streamlined, more effective and efficient in delivering what we wanted. And I think today we can be really proud of the woman sitting alongside me for her contribution to New Zealand, but also her contribution internationally. So it is a privilege and a pleasure, Helen, to introduce you. And I think you and Deborah James are now going to migrate to the table in the middle for a discussion. Thank you very much. Let's welcome Helen Clark.
Sound check.
Sound check.
Yep, that works.
All good?
Yep.
Actually, some of us have been in politics all our life, didn't really need microphones. Not the loud voice.
Dr. Helen, can I just add my excitement about the fact that you're here, and thanks for coming and sharing your expertise and your wisdom and your knowledge with us today. We've had, this meeting has been themed around the Convention for the Elimination of Women, and we've heard from Dr. Jackie Blue, and we've also heard from a number of representatives from women's NGOs. And now we have about an hour for conversation with you. We have some questions that have been put forward by our advisory panels and by some NGOs, and then at the end of the time for questions. So can I just start by asking you, so you held the role of as Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, 2009 to 2017. Just tell us a little bit more about what that involved and also what you're doing now.
Well, thank you, Deborah, and thank you also, Phil, for your lovely remarks, and Kathy for inviting me. You know, I was reflecting, coming in here and looking at this wonderful group of people of the times I ran for the City Council in 1974 and 77. There was nothing like this used to happen at the council. I'm just so thrilled to see the engagement with the community through this kind of hearing and event. So yes, I trotted off in April 2009 to the UN in New York, where I was based for 8 years. And what did it involve? Well, firstly, the job of UNDP administrator always was the second most important job in the UN, because the organisation was set up about 52 years ago to lead the global fight against poverty. So it was the development arm of the UN. The UN has other arms, and the one we mostly hear about is the failures of peace and security. And there's also the human rights arm, which is very important and relevant to the CEDAW Convention, which you're going to talk about soon. But UNDP led the development effort, and that meant it not only had a big program itself, but it chaired a UN development system, which had a lot of agencies, too many agencies. I mean, I did a lot of reform at UNDP, but you cannot close down other agencies. They've all got champions. You know, if there's an agency headquartered in Paris, there's no way the French want that closed down. If it's in Nairobi, the Kenyans will mobilise Africa against that. So we go. Very hard to close anything down in the UN. So it is what it is, and I had to chair a development group of over 30 entities, which is of course ridiculous. But anyway, you do what you can, recognising those challenges. So UNDP itself had an annual budget of about $5 billion, all of which had to be raised voluntarily, going to government for support. New Zealand government has been putting in $8 million a year for years. It'd be nice to see it increase actually, but anyway, New Zealand's also supported various activities in the South Pacific. And I remember, not working? Okay. So I remember when the Boxing Day tsunami happened and New Zealand made a very big response, particularly for Indonesia, we didn't go and set up a New Zealand aid camp in Aceh on the Indian Ocean. We contracted UNDP to do a lot of the work. So that's the sort of thing we can do. So it worked across poverty eradication, human development generally, disaster resilience, which we know quite a lot about in New Zealand, and I took a lot of New Zealand lessons to the UN with me. It worked a lot on what I call emergency development. So we've kept working all these dreadful years in Syria, because people have still got to have some kind of, babies are going to be born, the midwives have got to be paid, you're trying to support, the micro enterprise, life has to go on. And then the big and growing area of work has been environment, because now we've got the global agenda, which looks at people, prosperity, planet. How do you do these things together? Economic, social, environmental. So huge environment portfolios at UNDP, tackling climate change, loss of biodiversity, and so on. So that was the job, to lead that big effort. And I was privileged in those 8 years to travel to countries and parts of the world which, as a New Zealand PM, you would never go to, because there's no trade relationship, there's no historical relationship. But if you wanted me to tell you about Timbuktu or El Salvador and the gang problem, I can rattle on. I mean, I had privilege of seeing so many societies and their challenges, but also their achievements. Now, since then, what? So on the day, at the end of the 2 terms and 8 years, I left UNDP. And when you first announce you're going to leave, it's a bit like announcing you're leaving, politics. What are you going to do? Believe me, the minute you make that statement, the phone is ringing and the emails are going crazy. And in a sense, I've never been busier in my life, nor less supported, I might say, because when you're Prime Minister, you do have a bit behind you. When you're the Mayor, you have a bit behind you. When you're Administrator, you have a bit, not as much as that, but a bit. But in essence, I do a lot of public speaking and advocacy, because I'm now free of any institutional affiliation. I am not a university lecturer, I'm not a politician, I'm not a senior UN leader. I have a lot of passions and interests across the kinds of areas I've been talking about, and I get out and bat for them. And I use the very substantial social media platforms that I have, and a lot of conferences and events. And of course now I'm also free, now I've left the UN, to talk up New Zealand. So I've just been in the last week at the Rotary International Conference in Toronto. They hire the Ice Hockey Air Canada Stadium for their convention. There's anywhere from 15 to 20,000 people in the room. And they want to know about your story. And of course, my story is the New Zealand story, and it's a chance to talk things up. 3 women Prime Ministers. A lot of interesting things have happened in New Zealand and will continue to happen. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing a couple of probably about 3 advisory boards, sort of pro bono, public good things. I have started chairing the advisory board for UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report. That comes out once a year and is like the human development report of education. So it's important. I've gone on the board of Women Deliver, which is a major global advocacy organisation for women. It will have its mega conference in Vancouver, hosted by Justin Trudeau, June next year. Hope always Kiwis go, and I hope even some in this room might think about it. It gets 6,000 women. It's probably the biggest women's conference in the world outside the gathering at the UN for the Commission on the Status of Women each year. And then I'm co-chairing an advisory board with Norwegian money, but others are coming in, which is looking at new ways of incentivising stopping tropical deforestation. Because if we keep losing our tropical forests, we're doomed as a world. We need those forests. They're the lungs of the earth. And, you know, sadly, you know, trees go down as we speak. But it's a huge challenge. So that's the kind of thing I'm up to. Germany has a sustainable development strategy, and every 5-6 years they ask a group to review it. So I chaired the international peer review of their strategy. I was in Berlin about a month ago to hand it over to Chancellor Angela Merkel and make a speech about that. So believe me, there's plenty to do.
That's absolutely fascinating. So I would love to ask you more about some of those things, but I think I'm just going to move on because this next question is one of my favourites of the whole list. So earlier this year, you spoke at a Suffrage 125 event in Parliament where you said, women have to roll out their own carpet and kick the door in. So I'm sure every woman here and everyone watching on the live stream would love to know a little bit more about what you meant and how we can do it.
You see, in my opinion, wherever there's sort of, you know, positions of power being contested, you have to get in and jostle for them, right? No one says, oh, come on in, you know, this job is yours. No, you've got to make your case. Now, as women, often we're the first to say, oh, not me, I'm not ready. Remember Sheryl Sandberg, the chief operating officer at Facebook, wrote a book about this. She said, women have to lean in, because if you don't lean in, you're never going to be taking those steps. Now, of course, it's, you know, it's easier for some than others. I gave a speech on crashing through glass ceilings at the Asian Development Bank in Manila in March. And I said, in a sense, you know, crashing through the glass ceilings is something that women in countries around the world where they can't get their foot on the first rung of the ladder can't even dream about. I said, what about the 155 countries where there is some law that discriminates against women still? What about the countries where women can't own land, can't inherit land, can't open a bank account without the husband's permission, can't borrow money? You know, I mean, it's almost idle to talk about breaking the glass ceiling. That is their glass ceiling. It's down there. It's not being PM or the mayor or on a council or whatever. So, you know, there's many different starting points for crashing through glass ceilings. But the first thing is, you know, be prepared to step up and build the networks and support around you, because none of us ever achieve things on our own. We achieve them because other people support us and believe in us doing something.
So and that's part of rolling out the carpet, building your networks, yeah. So you've also talked about how New Zealand as a country can be a reference country that people look at, and we could stand for better and be an example in the world. What do you think we can be a good example for in the rest of the world, particularly in this CEDAW context?
Well, we're definitely being noticed on the political participation side for women. And, you know, Jacinda is a global sensation, really. I mean, you know, Jacinda mania wasn't just here. People are very, very interested in this young woman and what she and her partner are doing. And I always give a bit of a boost to Clark as well, because he's setting a model, isn't he, for others. You know, I mean, parental leave can be taken by women and men, but the male take-up rate is quite small. So he's saying this is a valid choice for men, and I think that's important. So we're being noticed, you know, with the third woman PM and a young one, and one is having a baby and says, you know, you've got a right to, you know, to do it all. You've got a right to have a family and have your job. I think in parliamentary participation, we're now at 38.7% female, and it, you know, 50% is within grasp. When you get to close to 40, it's within grasp. Didn't feel like that when I started. In 1981, the numbers of women in Parliament doubled from 4 to 8, and there were 92 MPs. So we were under 10%. It was a very, very small number. And at that stage, if someone had said, oh, you could be PM, you'd just have laughed, because that, I mean, wasn't even thought of or speculated against. The most you could have hoped for was to be a minister, and there have been very few women ministers. You've got to go back to Dame Hilda Ross and Mabel Howard. You know, and Fetu was the Minister of Tourism in Norman Kirk's government, but that was about it, you know. So it was thin, to say the least. So now we're noticed, and with a bit of a push, I think we could reach the gender parity. Secondly, we need to eliminate that remaining pay gap between men and women, which has fallen. You know, if you go back 20, 25 years, it was still about 25%. I think it's down to more like 10 now. So again, it's doable, isn't it? It's doable to get there. Now, something we really need to focus on, and I know there's been quite a lot of discussion about that, is the violence in the family. We have nothing to be proud of on that, nothing. We have a lot of work to do. And look, of course the problem isn't confined to New Zealand, but when you see where we are alongside other developed countries, it is pretty sobering. I wonder if it's time to roll out those ads again of about a decade ago when we had Peter Sharples and others. I think it was the It's Not Okay campaign.
We still have
that was a good campaign.
Yeah. It's still on now.
It bears repeating and repeating and repeating. It's not okay. Not okay to hit your wife. Actually, it's not okay to thrash your kids. You know, we dealt with that in a rather controversial law more than a decade ago. So, yeah, we really need to tackle that, because, you know, violence against women really blights women's ability to flower. If you know at the end of each day you're going to come home and he's going to hit you, or you've been at home and he comes home and he's going to hit you, what does that do for your self-esteem? It's horrible. You know, you just can't get ahead in that sort of circumstance, and it runs across all groups in the community, from the richest to the poorest, across ethnicity. It is a problem. So let's attend to that so we can really be a reference country.
Okay, thank you. So I'm got a few questions now that have been put forward by the NGOs and our advisory panels, and the first one is, the CEDAW Convention was drafted in the 1970s. What's your view on its relevance for women's rights today, both globally and in New Zealand, and particularly considering things like homelessness, poverty and immigration?
So we can see this convention, the CEDAW, as like a Bill of Rights for women. So it's important. And it might have been drafted in the 70s, but actually the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has its 70th anniversary this year, and it's still seen as a reference document. So CEDAW is a reference document for women's rights. And you know, a country like ours, it's so important that when New Zealand reports against the CEDAW Convention, that all the civil society groups are doing the shadow reporting. Because of course, governments will want to put a reasonable gloss on things, but you rely on civil society to say, well, here's our perspective of what really is ticking here. So we should take CEDAW seriously. We should support the review process and have input into it, because it's a form of accountability of keeping any government's feet to the fire about the things that aren't as good as they could be.
Any particular comments on the homelessness and poverty issues?
Oh, well, don't start me. No, I'm obviously extremely concerned at what has happened in Auckland. When I first started in politics and campaigning to be the MP for Mount Albert, one of the biggest issues was state housing, because the government of the day wanted to give people 5-year tenancies and then review them. And I remember people coming to see me as a young MP saying, look, I have a mental illness, and perhaps the review will take place at the point when I'm quite well. But then I lose the tenancy because I'm supposed to stand on my own feet, and then it comes back again. I don't have any control over this. There's so many conversations I had like that which brought home to me just how important stable public housing is. So I'm a huge advocate for state housing and public housing. And I don't think the sales of public housing have done us any favours as a society. I'd like to see it. I mean, Phil and I sort of feel a bit deja vu, really, because in the 80s you were minister and I was minister, we were busy building up the numbers. We did it again when we were in government last time. It has to be done again. You know, I mean, housing benefit has become indispensable, but in effect, every time you raise the benefit, the rent goes up as well. So if you have a strong social housing supply, you have more control over the price of rental housing. So, yeah, and then a lot of the poverty is related to the homelessness because the families can't afford the rents, and the more that's coming up for the rent, the less you've got for food on the table, and then the poorer the children's diet is, and all the other issues. You know, a child who's living in a car, how can they do their homework? They can't. I mean, it's just miserable. So we have some very big issues here to get on top of as a society.
So just leading on from that, your work at UNDP included a big focus on reducing inequalities and exclusion. And as you've just said, we know we have some very pressing issues here. This question is particularly about the inequalities in relation to Māori women. What's your view on why Māori women become sicker and die earlier than non-Māori, non-Pacific women?
Well, it is a very significant inequality in New Zealand society. I think the average life expectancy differential between Māori and other New Zealanders is around 7 years, and that's a stain on our conscience. So when we look at what is driving it, well, Māori on average are lower paid than others, and poverty is bad for health. That's a reality. Also, you have the issue that tobacco came to New Zealand with colonisation and came to have a place in Maori society. So when we think of the photos of the elderly people from Goldie going way back, we're thinking of the pipe. So it became a part of the society, but of course a deadly part. And if you look at the lower life expectancy, you'll be starting to look at issues like smoking rates. And smoking isn't just about lung cancer. It could be, you know, a factor in other things. Could be a factor in breast cancer. Could be a factor in cervical cancer. All sorts of things. And then you have also the nutrition and obesity issues. Now, for any society where you have rapid urbanisation, and Māori and Pacific people in New Zealand have had very rapid urbanisation. You know, when I was a child, the majority of Maori lived in rural areas, and then there was a huge urbanisation. Same with the Pacific. People came from rural communities and islands, and they came to the city. Your diet changes, right? And not for the better. And actually, going back the other way to the Pacific, New Zealand's been an exporter of the unhealthy mutton flaps and the corned beef tins full of fat and so on, you know, the sugar and the processed goods. I remember going to Tokelau Islands as PM way back in the early 2000s, and I sat around one evening with the ladies there, and they said, Prime Minister, our people are getting so many illnesses like diabetes. What is happening? And I said, well, it's diet. You used to have a very simple diet of the coconut and the fish from the sea and probably the bananas. And now, you know, what are people eating? What's in the shop? It's the sugars, it's the white flours, it's the things that aren't so healthy. And women can lead the way back on that. So I think in addressing significant health inequalities, yes, it's about poverty, yes, it's about smoking, yes, it's about nutrition issues, which again can relate back to poverty, of course, and the quality of good food that people can afford. So we need to tackle all these issues to address that gap in life expectancy and the greater level of illness.
Thank you. So this question sort of relates back to what you were saying about Jacinda, I think, earlier. What do you think are the significant shifts that have enabled us to be more accepting of women balancing their career and motherhood?
Well, I think the significant shift is that from the time of the baby boomers on, women did expect to be able to work. And for the most part, you know, while they also expect to have a family, they expected to return to work. And the things that have happened over the past 20 years or so with the improved access to early childhood care and education, with the 20 hours free, probably a bit tattered at the moment, but you know, it's a huge thing for working parents to have that support. Otherwise, it's money coming out of your pocket. The kindergarten was always free, but it wasn't so convenient for the working mother because kindergarten is the half day and not every day of the week, particularly for the 3-year-olds. So things like the 20 hours free, the paid parental leave, I think these have been quite influential in reinforcing that this is something that you know, women and young parents have a right to. It's interesting, isn't it, that during World War II, when a lot of men went away, and not so many women, women went as nurses and in other roles, but not as soldiers. But during that period, women were, quote, manpowered, right? Manpowered into the workforce. But at the end of the war, the men came back and they expected their jobs back. And the women went back home. And that was also an era when a woman married, she had to leave the public service. Can you believe it? So, you know, baby boomers never accepted these things. And I think we just have to keep working on improving the support for the young family so that women, like men have always had, have had a choice as to whether to stay at home, whether to have a family and work, or just work, which is what I did. But you know, these are all valid choices, and they have to be made possible.
So, you mentioned about the gender pay gap earlier. So this question is about how advocating for equal pay is a priority for the YWCA and for lots of us. From what you've seen internationally, what are your recommendations to eliminate discrimination in this area?
Well, it's a number of things, and one of them is women not being at a disadvantage because they have taken time out to have children. That's often where the pay gap comes from, because there's some critical years where men are climbing the ladder and women aren't. And often that time that's been spent at home is undervalued. I mean, women who are organising a family are pretty multi-skilled, but it's not formally recognised. I mean, Marilyn Waring is really the authority on this. She's written about the unpaid work of women extensively, and 3/4 of the world's unpaid work is done by women. Figure that, 3/4 of it. So, yeah, I think men taking more responsibility for family care and having a life pattern which mirrors that of women more, that will help bring down the gap. Now, secondly, there's a lot of things that employers can do to ensure that that women are encouraged to come on up the ranks, to lean in. You need to encourage peer group support, mentoring. You have to be very sensitive with recruitment and all of these issues. I mean, it's still not unknown for women to be asked, do they intend to have a family? In fact, Jacinda was asked that before the last election. And really, it's none of their business. You have rights as a human being, you have rights as an employee, whatever. Now, we have equal pay legislation. We've had it since the 70s. I, as Minister of Labour in 1990, persuaded Parliament to pass pay equity legislation. And Bill Birch at the time said, that'll be gone by Christmas if we win, and it was. Anyway, so we start again. It was. And, I think it's something we really need to be pushing in the workplaces. But we could go a step further and do what Iceland has done. And Iceland is a real champion in this area. So as I understand it, they've actually made it illegal to pay women less. Now that's kind of moving it from being a civil offence to a criminal offence. And what they now require is that any company with more than 25 employees has to actually prove that they are paying women equal. They have to put up a plan and give the evidence. So that would hurry a few up, I think. But, you know, it might sound, you know, like we're making an issue out of nothing. But this is real. Those of you who watch BBC News, have you noticed the ruckus in the BBC, where the woman who was heading the China Bureau was getting a fraction of the pay of the guys who did Washington, D.C. and so on. And there was no rationale for it. The men had been able to negotiate much bigger salaries. So this is just not acceptable behaviour. Now, can I also do a shout out for New Zealand football, our soccer? Because New Zealand football has implemented a parity policy between our New Zealand men's team and women's team. Parity on the pay that they get, the prize money, what they get for their image being used for advertising, and so on. And this is really world leading to see that. So a shout out for them.
That's wonderful. So can you share with us what is your vision for the future if we were to see true gender equality for all cultures, across all communities and across all gender diversities?
Well, there's areas we'd see a lot more women in, and in some ways the private sector's the slowest to move globally. If you look at proportions of women on boards and in senior management of major companies, it does struggle, you know, around the 20% mark. So definitely a lot of work for the private sector to do. But the public sector, including in New Zealand, shouldn't be complacent either. I don't think we're too flash with the numbers of women chief executives in the public sector at the moment. So, you know, let's hope that this is given to State Services Commission as a priority to address. But, you know, women also come from their many, many backgrounds. So as we work to achieve gender parity, it mustn't be just about people who look like me. It's got to be women who represent the whole diversity of our society, from all ethnicities, disability sector, LGBTI. You know, we come in many different forms, and that's got to be given regard to as well.
So this will be my last question before I hand over to the chair, so the committee can ask you questions too. So Dr. Blue did talk to us about gender budgeting and gender auditing this morning, but would you like to share your views on that as well from your experience?
Well, when I was at UNDP, we used to advocate gender-based budgeting, and we worked with close to 170 developing countries, and we would urge them in their budget to be able to identify what was being spent actually to promote and support women's interests. We also had what we called the gender marker scheme, which we could be audited against. So with all of the UNDP programs and projects, there had to be an assessment done of how many, what proportion were specifically about advancing women's interests, how many partially did it and how many didn't do it at all. And the aim was, of course, to ensure that there were none and that didn't do it at all, but that in the general programming that there would always be a gender perspective in it. So I think, the concept of gender auditing, gender budgeting, gender markers, that they do keep feet to the fire, and make you accountable for what you're doing to ensure that women are getting a fair shake.
Thank you. I'm just going to hand over to
thanks
the chair.
very much, Deborah. Helen's already traversed a wide range of issues, but I've got one to start the ball rolling, and mine is, we'll be hearing in the next item how Auckland Council's addressing inequality and how we're promoting women, but what do you think about having a quota for our top 100 companies to get more women on boards?
Well, Norway led the way on this, at least a decade ago. They just said, we've got to have parity on the boards. Now the usual cry, I'm sure, went out in Norway with people saying, but we don't find the women. You look for them, they're there, I know. I remember when I used to chair the Cabinet Honours and Appointments Committee, and New Zealand governments make a lot of appointments, and occasionally a minister would bring up recommendations for a board that didn't have any women on it. We'd say, please go away and look harder. So, I think that the Norwegian precedent is well worthy of study. Now, there's a phrase that Hillary Clinton uses, and it's probably not, unique to her. It says, gender equality is the right thing to do, right? It's a human right, it's right in principle. But it's also the smart thing to do. It's a smart thing for many reasons, but if we take it to the company level, there's a huge body of research evidence now that shows that the companies which have significant women's representation on their boards and in their senior management do better. They're more profitable. Now, why would this surprise us? They are attuned to the female 50% of the population and what products and services they want and so on. So, even for those who aren't convinced on the principle, I'd say look at the outcome, and the outcome is pretty good for the company.
Thanks, Helen. John Watson.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Helen. I just wonder that in terms of your experience, both as Prime Minister and on the United Nations, what your view is on the ability of governments these days to make the sort of transformational change, not just in gender equality, but with violence and some of these terrible social ills, that governments like, the first Liberal government, the first Labor government, where they really kind of revolutionised our society. Arguably, we've had a number of governments have taken us back the other way. What's your view on how governments can actually bring about that sort of change that's needed in today's kind of bureaucratic and, kind of slanted society?
Well, it is different, isn't it? For a start, the state is smaller, but that doesn't mean it should be absent. And I think, being in government that 9 years from 99 to 2008, what you knew was that you had to have a smart state. It might have owned very little in the economy, but it could certainly set a strategic direction as to where it could go. And it could open up markets, it could facilitate. I mean, some of the most, the greatest memories I have of those days are two sets of major rolling consultations and engagements we had around New Zealand. One was that I and Minister of Maori Affairs and senior ministers would travel around the different rohi and meet with iwi. And everyone would come, which was, humbling really. Everyone would come. Men, women, students, Māori businesses, just people, Māori social service, everything. And you'd sit, and it would, actually our coming brought people together as well, and you'd sit and facilitate conversation about the direction and where we might be able to be, helpful in some way. But actually they were doing it themselves, but, positive support and engagement helps. And we did the same thing at the regional level with Jim Anderton as Minister of Regional Development. He and I and a group of ministers would go out region after region, have these big conversations with regions, really sort of aimed at how does a region make its luck? What are their comparative advantages, and trying to look at how to push things ahead. So, the smart state, leadership, signalling direction, preparing to engage. It's not like the Liberal government or the first Labor government or whatever, where a lot of the economy was in state hands. It's different, and I think the role of the community is different. The strength and size now of the civil society sector, which must be consulted, must be engaged, must be involved, and I often think that at the council level you're better at that than central government, because central government's sitting quite a way removed from the community. But if a council doesn't engage with its community, it's got a problem. So it does, and you do, and this is evidence of it. But it calls out for leadership. It's strategic leadership, and then there's always also the big bits of legislation you can do that will make a difference. I mean, if you legislated for gender parity on boards, well, I mean, the screaming from the business pages of the Herald we could hear down on the Chatham Islands, but, you know, it certainly make things change. So, yeah, I can think of, you know, quite a lot of really transformational legislation, I think, that we passed, which really stood the test of time.
Thanks, Helen. Richard?
Thank you. Kia ora, Helen. I guess my question I had is similar for Dr. Blue as well, is around things like, you know, even looking at my year with Helen, the kind of depressing feeling at the end of that movie, even though there was some uplifting things at the end, but, you know, it was really kind of helpless. You've got, like, Trump, all those women who kind of felt this is our one chance to get a woman in power, and you ended up with a misogynist in power, basically. And the other campaigns, like, you've seen huge wins across your life, but how do we inspire young people today to hold on when sometimes the troughs are so depressing?
Yeah, I mean, that film has had an interesting reaction because some people get very, very depressed by it, but others get so mad they get active, you know. So I think the message is we just have to keep at it, I mean, the US is in a very difficult state at the moment. This next Supreme Court decision could be disastrous for women. And anyway, I do find it interesting that at a time when overwhelmingly Catholic societies like Ireland, Argentina and Chile are, you know, moving forward on a woman's right to choose, the US could roll back. But, you know, the women will get mad and they'll get organised in the States. I mean, you know, the States is capable of electing Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump. Who knows who it'll be next time, but it'll be a reaction, you know. Whether it takes another 2 years or another 6, it'll be a reaction. It'll be something different, and it'll try and get a bit of a balance. But you just have to keep at it. If you believe in things, you have to have a long-term perspective, and you won't win everything. You know, there will be setbacks, but you have to keep at it.
Thanks, Helen. Before we give you a small gift for coming here today, I've got 2 little requests. The first is, would you mind walking across the room to have a picture taken with our disability panel members who are sitting just over there? And also, would you mind having a stand-up vox pop lasting 1 minute with our internal comms team as you leave?
Not at all, and I can see Mary, who I went to Epsom Girls Grammar with, sitting over there, so hi Mary.
So just to close, all our speakers today have had a wonderful gift, and I'd like to ask the Mayor to present you with yours. The Mayor's planting 1 million trees in his term of office. We're up to 174,000, so you're getting number 174,006. It's a dwarf. It's a dwarf Ko-Fi, and it won't grow any.
About a metre and a half.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. So thank you very much indeed. Yep. And I will move that Helen Clark be thanked for her presentation, seconded by John. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So we'll just have maybe just 5-minute break, and then we have our final item, which is our staff reporting on what the council's doing to overcome inequality for women.
I was watching CNN.
I was like, oh, really?
They were talking about men and how...
Oh, I can't, yeah.
men ended up
I talked to Helen
all you men.
Can you guys, hey John, can you guys look over here because Josephine wants to get a photo of all the guys and just all the guys and just her. She wants to get a photo of all the guys. There you go. This is the gender balance. Lack of, this is the lack of gender balance. Gender equity.
Okay, folks.
Community development safety.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please.
Egg burger and chips, please. Egg burger and chips, my order.
I'd like to invite Deborah James to introduce the team. It's our last item. This is actually how Auckland Council is responding to inequality and where we're going in the future. So Deborah, I'll leave it to you to introduce everybody, and we hope to be out here in the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm actually just going to get them to introduce themselves.
Tonya.
Kia ora koutou, my name's Christine Olsen and I manage the Community Empowerment Unit in Council.
Kia ora. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Flitton-Higgins. I'm a team leader in community policy.
Pull them a bit closer.
I've got a short presentation just to summarise the report, if we could get that. Yep. So this is the report, which is really the last item on this very exciting meeting. And this report responds to an outstanding resolution from the governing body which asked for a report on gender issues raised by the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. So you probably don't really need me to give you the context because we've been hearing about it for the whole meeting, but just to say, CEDAW is has a very comprehensive set of goals covering economic, social, health, legal and education issues for women, also marriage and family life and political and public life. Appendix A in the report sets out all the CEDAW articles in a summary form. The CEDAW convention is very much a national level convention, so all the articles in it are set at the level for a national government to really be delivering on and to be held to account for. We ratified it as a country in 1985, and almost every country in the world has ratified it. I think there's only 6 that haven't, and the United States is one of them. And as we've heard, we have to make regular reports, and this year is a reporting year, and lots of people here are about to go to the UN to report. And in 2015, the Pacific Women's Watch group came to council and sought support for the City for CEDAW program. So the City for CEDAW program is something that happened. We've just lost the slides. That happens. It's an American initiative. Can you go back? Thanks. And unfortunately, America is one of the 6 cities in the world, the United States, that hasn't ratified CEDAW at the national level. So the City for CEDAW program, as I understand it, operates at the local government level in the context of there being no national ratification. So the report, just to summarise the key issues in the report, we, as you know, we have a strong commitment to diversity, inclusion, belonging and participation at Council, and our commitment to gender issues is contained within that wider diversity and inclusion commitment. In the time since Pacific Women's Watch came and presented previously on CEDAW, we've done a number of things that have actually strengthened all of those commitments. So we've just, as you know, refreshed the Auckland Plan this year with a very strong belonging and participation commitment in it. We've developed and established and started implementing our diversity and inclusion framework, which is the Inclusive Auckland framework. And we also have developed the Thriving Communities Action Plan and the Empowered Communities approach, which gives effect to that action plan. So what we've done in the report is we've identified those high-level commitments and the work programs that fall from them, and we've mapped them across just in a summary form to the key CEDAW goals that they relate to. So we don't have something that relates to every single CEDAW goal, but we do have a number of things that relate to a number of the goals. So Appendix C, which is the big one, sets that out. And the recommendations in the report, the discussion in the report notes that all of those work programs are ongoing. You have oversight of them as governing body, local boards have oversight of them, and ELT. So we already have quite a lot of oversight and regular reporting on these work programs. And the recommendations proposes that we package up the ones that relate to the CEDAW goals and report regularly back to this committee to you as a way of letting you know what progress we're making on them. And the other thing that's noted is that New Zealand Treasury is just starting to look at the gender budgeting issue. That report that Dr. Blue talked about came out in April, I think. And my suggestion in the report is that we wait and see what the next steps are before we adopt any kind of gender budgeting issue here. So that's a quick summary. And Christine and Elizabeth can answer more detailed questions on some of our work programs.
Yeah, open for questions. Josephine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation and the report. I just wanted to ask about cities in CEDAW. Do you think that is something that Auckland Council should look at, even though nationally we've ratified CEDAW, but that doesn't really mean that it's filtered into what we do in Auckland Council?
So I actually think that we are already doing effectively what we would be doing if we'd adopted that program, and that's what I was trying to show by mapping our work programs across to the CEDAW goals in that last appendix. So I'm not sure that that it would generate anything beyond what we're already doing, and I was trying to achieve the same outcome by proposing that we report regularly to you on those work programs that map to the CEDAW goals.
Supplementary question, thank you. Do you think we really are being serious about gender issues when it's not actually, specifically mentioned? It's sort of in the catch-all, we're going to be inclusive of diversity, but it's not specifically identified as a priority in what we do in council. So if we were a city of CEDAW, maybe it would be prioritised and mentioned separately.
And it would be, if you made a decision, as governing body members to adopt that approach, then it would be. I guess, that needs to be weighed up against the potential costs for establishing a new program, and whether we would actually end up delivering anything different from what we're already delivering. So it's in your hands.
Okay, so how do I get the ball rolling on that? Is it a motion from here?
Well, I think we could ask for a report if that's what the committee wants to
I'm sure my male colleagues on the committee would support that. Wouldn't you guys?
Think about it.
So we could ask for a report back to the next committee. Ebara, a report back to the next committee on the possibility of, or to look at the options. Yes, for joining Cities for CEDAW. Alfie?
Just a comment to that. I think it is important, as Deborah's just said, that we need to do the work around alignment. Don't forget, we've got other applications, even from our panel around age-friendly. And so, I mean, yeah, look, bringing back the report, totally support. But I think it needs to at least outline exactly what you've said, and also around others that have come through. I mean, we ended up passing the city peace, music, and I mean, look, age-friendly, we could do some work on that, and even this one, I think it's just important that all the information comes back.
That's what we'll come back to next meeting. So we're just crafting it. Any other questions while we're waiting, Greg?
Yeah, thank you. My question just relates to the articles at Appendix C around the article of employment, and it talks about how women make up 60% of Auckland Council's total workforce and 30% of senior leaders. I just wanted to, I just want to dwell into that a little bit deeper if I could, and that just talking about the second layer of senior leadership, so I'm not quite sure what senior leaders, how wide that is, but I'd just be interested to know, in Auckland Council, in the CCOs, the layer that reports to the chief executives, where the power, operational power bases are, what percentage of women make that up, and do we have, if possible, do we have any targets of what we're trying to achieve in that?
So that statistic relates to that layer at Auckland Council, the one that's in the report. It's not including the CCOs. So at Auckland Council, that layer is about 80, between 70 and 80 people. So that's what that relates to. And in terms of targets, we don't have a specific target, but we have set a goal within our diversity and inclusion framework that layer of our organisation will reflect Auckland's diversity in terms of gender and ethnicity. So we've set ourselves that overall goal, and we have a number of actions underneath that framework that will help us work towards achieving that. So change in recruitment practice, talent attraction, supporting women into leadership, and a suite of other actions that will help us to get there.
Thank you, that's very helpful. I just wonder how I might be able to get the equivalent from the CCOs as well. Is there an avenue that I can follow through with?
I'll chase that up. So yes, certainly Auckland Council has adopted, as Deborah has outlined, the goals, and we'll be reporting on those. So I'll go through our chief executive and get that sort of material for the CCOs.
Auckland Council family.
Yeah,
family.
the family.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for the thank you.
Question. Okay, we've drafted a D. If everybody's happy with it, and there's no more questions, I'll put the recommendations. Sorry.
I just had one question, and I get a strong sense from the framework, especially the diversity and inclusion framework. I'm not, granted the discussion that we've had today around the disproportionate numbers of women, but women of colour essentially is the term used in the research, Māori and Pacific. Do you think we are being as deliberate in this plan, in this work where I'm reading it, as we should be or could be? And I don't feel so strong, I don't get that sense as I read the material.
Are you asking about staff or our outward-facing work programs?
Well, staff for this at the moment, but then outward-facing as well.
So I am pleased to be able to tell you that very recently the executive leadership team has signed off on a women's accelerated leadership development program, and the focus of that will be Māori, Pacifica and ethnically diverse women at council. So I agree we could be being much more deliberate, and we're just about to take that step in terms of staff. And we also have the mahi, the report also talks about the mahi Māori leadership pilot. So I'm not quite sure how many staff are in that, but the majority of them are Māori women in that leadership pilot program that's currently running.
And that is supplementary chair, and that's looking at going into the upper echelons of leadership as opposed to what we do with quite a few of our people, which is just internships at their front door.
No, it's a leadership development program, they both are, yeah.
Right, thank you.
And in terms of outward-facing work, I'm going to pass over to colleagues.
So we have a number of projects, particularly through our local board work program. The Auckland plan now directs us to focus on those most in need. So, you know, for example, through our Youth Connections program, which is about getting young people into employment with a focus on NEETs, we have some targeted programs for Māori and Pacific women. We have some youth leadership development programs that particularly focus on Māori and Pacific women. And some programs that focus on ethnic diversity as well.
And I think also looking at our community facilities, so in our community places, we've got a wide range of community groups, all different kinds of ethnic backgrounds, refugee women, Māori and Pacific women, using them for all kinds of different programs. So again, a really nice spread actually of activity when you look across the board.
Last question from Josephine, and then I'll... Absolutely.
Okay, look, there's also elected representatives, and so we were, last elections, we promoted the ability to vote and the desire to vote from different groups that may not have formally voted in such large numbers and representation. And I think we've, in terms of women, we've now got 53% of our local board members are women. That's a fantastic, great result. More than the number of Aucklanders that are, so slight increase there. 33% of our governing body members are women. But in terms of designing our program for 2019, we're intending to make an even stronger effort to get a greater representation from those communities that are not perhaps as represented as strongly around the tables as we can. So we're not only looking at our senior staff, our people coming into the organisation, but we'd also like to work strongly in terms of representation.
Josephine, last question.
Just to add on to that, if I could also say, not just Māori, Pacific, ethnic women, but also women in the disability community, especially given the high numbers, you know, the issues with employment there. So I want to put that to the fore. But I also wanted to say not just the staff, elected members, but also the wider council family, the CCOs especially. We had the Appointments, Performance and Review Committee previously, and we're appointing board directors. Now, of those board directors, yes, there are women, but there are no women who are ethnic or Pacific that are appointed on council-controlled organisations' boards. Now, that has to change, and even though you have a policy, or we have this mentioned in the CDOR reporting, it's not, in fact, really genuine to the CDOR articles, because it doesn't look at the diversity of the women that are in those roles. So really stressing the importance of that to be taken on board.
Sorry, just
final question.
And it's only because I've read this again. Because in regards to D, in this pamphlet it mentions countries. So I just wanted that report to come back whether in fact Auckland Council can join the cities for, I don't know, it just says countries, and I don't know, but at least the report will come back.
Will do. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put it, all those in favour, against, carried. Thank you very much, that was brilliant.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chair.
Kathy.
Well done to you.
And the staff, thank you.
Oh no, stop, God, I haven't thanked anybody. I haven't thanked anybody in a
Cities can join, where a country doesn't ratify. But if a country has ratified, can a city also join?
Just before we leave, I have some thank yous.
Okay.
To our speakers, Dr. Jackie Blue, the Right Honourable Helen Clark, and panel members Christine King, Whitney Adams, Cinnamon Whitlock, and Tangalotelli, Peggy Fairbairn Dunlop. Demographic Advisory Panel members and women's groups for providing excellent questions to our speakers and panel. Deborah James, you did so well. Helen Dodd, Sonia, my darling, thank you so much. Sonia and Megan, where are you? These women have worked like Trojans to get this perfectly set up for today. Ramari, you did so well. You still here, Slattery? She's gone. Wonderful. Sandy Mills, who did the comms and sweated blood over it. Ian Maxwell, thank you so much for supporting the meeting. And the governance advisors in the background who handled the public today and made everything flow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And the hub team's in the background doing all the mahi, all the hard work. The catering team for afternoon tea, public councillors, independent Māori statutory board members, local board members and media. Thank you all for being here. And you guys at the back for taking the pictures.